Board is coming out of recess, and we're meeting at the Linn County Fairgrounds. Again, want to thank people for making time to be here. Thought I would go over a little bit about tonight's agenda, which may look a little different from previous agendas, but I assure you we still have a public comment period. The public comment period has been moved. It's still 5 minutes a speaker. It's been moved after third consideration. This is after a lot of lengthy discussions whereby then the board has to make some pretty challenging decisions on complicated issues. We felt, given the depth and length of a lot of the public comment that we've had, and that we anticipate will follow afterwards, that we wanted to be able to have policy discussions before any lengthy public comment on this item. So public comment is still available. I know that there's individuals who have given us either their prepared remarks or remarks of any kind in general that we will place on the public record, and certainly we'll reference these if those individuals make a public comment this evening. We also will, I believe there's a presentation from the applicant. We're going to get an update from Charlie Nichols, our Director of Planning and Development, on decommissioning and any other staff questions from the board. We'll get an update on really what third consideration is and what are the potential actions we could take tonight and going forward. So hopefully we'll have a lot of robust discussion. We'll have a lot of questions either for the applicant or our staff, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that have been brought up in previous meetings, since we do have public comment after our deliberations. So with that, is there anything from my colleagues? Is there anyone here who wishes from Coggon Solar LLC to? I was told that there was a presentation. Charlie, do you have a preference, or do you want to give an update?
Thank you. Yep, can you hear me? Okay, it's on. So last meeting, there were some questions about the decommissioning plan, decommissioning costs, and in particular using salvage value to offset those decommissioning costs. So I want to review the changes that have been made to the decommissioning plan to date, and then go into some more detail on using salvage for decommissioning costs. So we hired Stanley Consultants, a third-party firm not associated with Coggon LLC or Clinera, to review the decommissioning plan as it was first submitted. Stanley Consultants found that the costs did not reflect things like soft costs and contingencies. They found the decommissioning cost to be low in their opinion. They thought things like environmental studies and permitting, demolition engineering, construction management, contractor overhead, insurance and bonding costs, and contingency were not included. They estimated this would add another 20% to the total decommissioning costs. They also had recommendations about updating the salvage value on a yearly period every few years, and updating the recycling costs as well. So we did take Stanley's recommendations and require some changes from Clinera. The decommissioning costs were raised from an initial $1.7 million to about $2.7 million, and that was accounting for the soft costs and a contingency. Language was added in about reviewing the recycling costs by a licensed engineer every 2 years, and then reviewing the salvage value every 5 years, again by a licensed engineer. There was also a condition added after the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting concerning demolition or debris cleanup. There was a question what would happen if these panels blow into somebody's yard. There is a condition currently in place that states the project owner will be responsible for cleaning up all debris, and it gives the project owner 72 hours from a storm event to be on site to assess and acknowledge the damage and come up with a plan for cleaning it up. On to using the salvage value. So currently Clinera has a base performance bond in place of $1 million. The decommissioning costs are estimated at $2.7 million, which again was about $1 million increase from their initial decommissioning plan. Now there's a wide variety of decommissioning plans and decommissioning policies across the U.S. for utility scale solar sites. Some of them allow salvage value to be used, some of them do not allow salvage value to be used. We were allowing salvage value to be used in our decommissioning cost as part of that cleanup cost, or part of making the county whole if they did have to decommission the site in the future. The majority of decommissioning plans do let applicants include salvage value, but not all decommissioning plans do. In fact, some states specifically exclude salvage value in their plans. New Hampshire, North Dakota, and Vermont exclude salvage value. Interestingly, the Bureau of Land Management also does not allow salvage value to be included in their decommissioning plans. They permit all utility solar projects on federal land. They have about 37 projects totaling 7,000 megawatts. And their specific stance on including salvage value, this is a quote from their policy: reclamation costs will be calculated as if there was no such value, since these are generally based upon a transient market value for commodities. Another note, Louisa County in Iowa, the only other utility scale solar project in Iowa, and the other project done by Clenera also does not include salvage value as part of the decommissioning plan. I would be happy at this point to take any other questions on decommissioning plan, salvage value, or we can move into the applicant's presentation, and I can take questions after that as well.
Supervisor Zumba, Supervisor Walker, are there any questions right now that you are thinking of regarding decommission? And certainly after the applicant gives a presentation, if we have additional follow-up for Charlie, that's...
I guess. At what point are we going to hear from Darren? Because I don't want to get the cart any further in front of the horse than it already is.
Could you specify a little bit more?
I guess I'm continuing on from our meeting today, which this was discussed about how third and final and another one and all that works. I've had concerns about decommissioning from the beginning. I never understood why we'd accept salvage value when it's such an unknown. Having said that, if there would be a change in that, when would that change? I'm just trying to get it right, Charlie. Yep. When would that change come about?
Understood. Great question, great point. Charlie, or the individual that Supervisor Zumba is mentioning is Darren Gage, our Director of Policy and Administration. Darren, don't mean to put you on the spot, but Supervisor Zumba, are you sort of uplifting really what our options are for this evening as we...
Yeah, I'd like to know our options for this evening, and if we'd like to see other changes, regardless of what they are, when is the best time to bring them about, and how this is all going to play out.
Darren, good evening.
Good evening. Supervisor Zumba, I understand your question to be if you, after consideration tonight, determine that you want to make some changes to the decommissioning language in the ordinance as it currently stands? Okay. The recommendation and advice that you've heard from legal counsel would be that if you make a substantive or material change to the ordinance as it exists after the first two readings, that you go back and restart the process with first reading.
Okay.
So with that, is first reading also a public hearing?
Yeah, so yes, generally prior to the first reading, first consideration of an ordinance, you have a public hearing, which requires noticing that public hearing to the public. You have the not less than 4, no more than 20 days in an official newspaper of the county. So you asked also about other changes. And as we discussed this morning, you're not going to find necessarily any place in the Iowa Code that defines what is material or what is substantive. With regards to changing the setback, that's going to be a subjective decision that the board has to make. Is 100 feet material? Is 200 feet material? What's that cutoff? So you can proceed. One of the options you have before you tonight is to proceed with the third and final consideration, publish the ordinance and its rule. You can move to postpone third and final consideration. Just because it's on the agenda does not require you to take action on it. You can have another series of meetings just like this and not proceed with your third and final consideration until you're ready to do so. So you simply continue to postpone third and final consideration. You may decide to make other substantive or material changes besides the decommissioning to the ordinance as it is currently written. That would also at some point, depending on the substance of those changes, require you to go back and start the process over.
Okay.
Did that answer your questions?
It's as clear as mud, but we'll get through it.
Any other questions for Darren while he's up here? We may rely on your expertise a little bit later. Did you have anything else? Charlie? Nope. Yeah, Mr. Fitzgerald, good evening.
How are you?
Peachy, how are you?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Tom Fitzgerald, Director of Development, Clenera, speaking on behalf of Coggon Solar. So, again, I'd just like to start off tonight's evening. I think I'm going to touch on some of the more technical aspects of some of the concerns we've heard, but just want to start off again by talking about the benefits that this project is going to bring to Linn County. It's going to be a $150 million capital investment and create approximately 300 construction jobs that will be staffed through cooperation with the Cedar Rapids and Iowa Trades Council. An interesting component of that that I was unaware of is that this will also provide an opportunity for training through the trade lodges, in that if they don't currently have enough people staffed, anybody that's brought into the project will go through their training regimen and will leave the construction of this project better enhanced to continue their progression through the workforce. Again, 2 to 3 long-term jobs for the continuous operation of the project, 35 years. 100% of this clean, renewable energy is going to be used locally and regionally, including at the Linn County REC and all of SIPCO's 13 cooperative members. The clean energy is going to power the equivalent of 18,000 Iowa homes and decrease CO2 emissions by 300 million pounds a year, equivalent to 15 million gallons of gasoline, which as a number, I can't even conceptualize how much gas that is. And it's going to increase property tax revenues by millions of dollars over the project life. So, am I teed up here? Yep, thank you. So I think one of the first things that we just want to touch on coming out of last week's meeting is just this issue on panel clearance height again. You know, one of the things that I think we want to point out is that because of the undulating terrain of the site, as you can kind of see a graphic depiction of a similar landscape on the right there, is that many of the panels are already going to have a leading edge above 18 inches as their lowest point. Again, something else to note is that the ground coverage ratio of the project is only 30%. So within the array fields, only 30% of the ground is either covered by panels or shaded by panels at any given time. So that leaves more than 60% in between all of the rows for natural vegetation to grow and flourish. You know, the affected areas of the native prairie that are really going to be affected are right at that leading edge, right where the panel comes down and is touching those plants and maybe bending them over or somehow, you know, not allowing them to grow to their full potential. So we had our technical engineers back at the Boise home office take a look at this to figure out exactly how much time of the day or year the panels are actually going to be at that low leading edge. And it turns out that during June, which is the longest time of the year, the modules are really at only that leading edge of 18 inches for an hour and 15 minutes per day on either side. So the rest of the time, the modules are up above a 24-inch minimum panel clearance. I think Mike said 60 or 70% of the time. Is that correct, Mike? So 60 or 70% of the time, you're going to have a panel clearance height that is at or above the county recommended height. So just a little bit of food for thought there. You know, we see some really great depictions here. Unfortunately, the graphic on the right also showed some time series. We had a little looped video there that's not showing, but showed a really nice time series that I'd like to share with you that kind of shows how the panels work and undulate throughout the day and how there really is minimal impact to the vegetation. So moving on, just again want to touch on the property value impacts, understand that as a major concern here. You know, like I mentioned previously, we have commissioned a third-party property value impact report that's conducted by a team of certified appraisers. You know, to become a certified appraiser is similar to becoming a fiduciary. It's a highly regimented, licensed, registered professional career that you are basically held to a national standard. So these are not people who are putting their reputation on the line lightly to make the statements that are in this report that was provided as part of this application. I'd just like to point out that as part of that report, again, they interviewed over 40 county and township assessors in Midwestern states, all of them who have one of these installations in their jurisdiction, and they determined that there was no negative impact on property values. Through the course of a lot of the public comments that we've heard, there's been reference to one particular study that was examining the impact of property values on Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It was conducted by the University of Rhode Island. It did, in fact, find an impact of property values on highly densely populated areas, and in fact, they chose Massachusetts and Rhode Island as the study case for this study because of their high population density. Massachusetts and Rhode Island are the second and third most densely populated state in the United States. Iowa, for reference, is 42nd. That study interestingly concluded solar developments on landfills, industrial areas, or in rural areas have smaller and statistically insignificant effects on prices, referring to home prices in proximity to the project. SEIA, the Solar Energy Industry Association, has some interesting studies on its website as well. One of them was conducted in Illinois that found that property values within 1 mile actually went up by 2% after a solar farm is constructed. And then likewise, an examination of 5 counties in Indiana found that properties within 2 miles on average also went up by 2% or more compared to their previous value to the installation. So again, just a few things to think about as we move forward through here. Coming out of Thursday's meeting, we were asked about what else can we do to minimize the impact of this project on surrounding property values. And I reference all of the studies and academic work that has been done that I just addressed, but I think I would say what haven't we done? We've accommodated a staff requested 300-foot setback from all of the occupied residences within 1,000 feet of the project site, in addition to those that are not located in Linn County, and to one property in particular that does not currently have a residence on it. So, I think we are doing the things that we are asked. We're also planning on including vegetation and screening. And I think, as Charlie noted in his comments last week, the standard of 300 feet that Linn County, and the precedent, I would say the precedent that Linn County is setting of 300 feet is in excess of what most solar ordinances currently require in the United States. It's not at the upper limit. We recognize that. And I will say that upper limit of 500 feet that Charlie described, it would also have a detrimental impact on the project. One of the things that we've been working on in the background, and I'll just jump ahead here because I think it's kind of important to talk about unintended consequences. We are avoiding some particular areas that maybe have sensitive ground underneath them, whether they be wet or in floodplains or too close to floodplains or wet buffer areas that the county is asking us avoid to help maintain soil quality and the conditions of the site. That is forcing us to encroach closer and closer to the property boundaries of our neighbors. We would probably be able to have a tighter footprint if we were not so required to stay out of certain areas, like particularly just south of the substation. You can see there's a broad open strip there. We had anticipated on putting arrays there, but now we're no longer able to do so based on some of the staff requests. So those blocks have been moved to areas that are now closer to some of the residences, unfortunately. So there is a give and take here on where these projects and the blocks need to be situated. We are contractually obligated to generate a certain amount of electricity, and that's going to require a certain amount of infrastructure that unfortunately is inelastic. So I'll move on. The decommissioning plan. Charlie, thank you for your detailed comments, and I think what was a really fair and balanced look at decommissioning plans, I think both regionally and nationally. Yes, do some jurisdictions exclude salvage value? Yes, they do. Is that a burden on the project? Yes, it is. Does that come at a cost? Yes, it does. So this decommissioning plan was prepared by a licensed engineer at Terracon. They're a national leader in civil engineering. We, the applicant, also paid, I don't remember how much money, a significant amount of money to have all of these application and plans and studies reviewed by a third party that was independently hired by the county. And they affirmed both the view of the decommissioning plan after making some recommendations that we incorporated into it, that it was sufficient and protected the county's interest. That being said, I'll just run through some of the things that are in here that are a little bit atypical. We have a 20% contingency that covers all of the soft costs. We're updating the financial assurance annually. We're looking, and basically the financial assurance is going to go up when the decom costs exceed the salvage value. And if we were not to increase our financial assurance, the zoning permit can be revoked if we're not meeting those requirements. Finally, we're looking at updating the recycling cost every 2 years by a licensed engineer. And here it says that the salvage value will be updated every 5 years by a licensed engineer. It may make sense, and we're open to this, is to align the salvage value recalculation and the recycling cost recalculation to every 2 years. That comes at a cost to us, certainly, but I think that kind of solves part of the question as to whether or not there's going to be a gap between the cost of removal and the cost of the facility at any given point in time. And as you're getting closer out into time towards that date certain where the project would be decommissioned, you'll have more certainty around both recycling value and salvage value and be able to put an adequate financial security in place to protect the county. One other thing that some people had commented on out of last week's meetings is that the salvage value of the plant might at some point approach zero. That's likely not true given that roughly 20% of the current salvage value is tied to commodity prices of steel and copper. Yeah, sure, the price of those commodities fluctuate, but I don't think they've ever approached zero. And I doubt that they will in any of our lifetimes. So I just want to point that out, that there is intrinsic value to the plant. Whether or not the solar panels are antiquated and hold no value and actually have a cost to remove, yes, that's a different question that is open for debate, and we acknowledge that. So just diving into the details here a little bit on the decom costs. So as Charlie referenced, we started out at almost $1 million lower on our initial decom estimate. I think we came in a little bit above 1.7. Right now, the total decom cost in 2020 dollars is $2.68 million. That contains a 20% contingency, which is $447,000, and then 6 miles of county road repair, which is another almost $500,000. So, those are significant cost adders that are atypical to a decom plan that, is a little bit outside of the purview of the jurisdiction, and perhaps why also we're asking you to consider the salvage value of the plant and the current level of the financial assurance and the mechanisms that we've put in place to reevaluate and realign the financial assurance in the event that the current financial assurance of $1 million is no longer adequate to cover the delta. I'll leave it at that. My final point is, there was some reference to the cost of removing solar panels at $1.25 per module, as that was going to be the wage paid to a crew of people to remove those modules. You can see on the chart on the right, that's from the decom plan. It actually has the same unit price in there, $1.25 a module. But, a crew of guys can remove a lot of modules in an hour. And, if you were removing one module per minute with 2 people, that would still equate to an average wage of $37.50 an hour. So thank you for your time and consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Louis, do you have any questions for right now?
Not right now.
Supervisor Walker? I appreciate Mr. Fitzgerald. I think I'll go back to Charlie if he has any questions that he needs from us regarding their presentation on decommissioning. Particularly, do you mind coming up, Charlie? Let me ask. So, thank you, Charlie. Given what Mr. Fitzgerald has uplifted regarding the decommissioning plan, I know that you've uplifted that it's estimated, and we had could you walk through how we estimated that number? We did, if I do recall, did we hire, did we make that decision in-house, or was that through a third party?
The decision to.
I'm sorry, how to come up with that number,
The-
the 2.68 million?
So that decision was a combination of in-house and then Clenera's own work. So they initially submitted to us a decommissioning plan where they were estimating the cost of decommissioning their own facility. We did hire a third party, Stanley Engineers, a local engineering firm, to go over their document in finer detail and tell us whether or not it was actually accurate. And they found it to be a bit low, about missing some contingencies, some soft costs, which were then communicated to the applicant, and the applicant then increased the costs or added in their comments from Stanley to increase that decommissioning cost from 1.7 million to 2.7 million. So I guess a short way of answering your question, the initial cost was supplied by the applicant. It was then reviewed by our engineering firm and updated.
Excellent, because one of the numbers that we're starting to get from people who've tuned into this is that, that the decommissioning cost, as one person estimated, is 30 million. And so we have a consultant telling us it could be 2.6 million, and I assume that's in today's dollars, not annualized out.
That's in today's dollars. And it's really hard to predict with accuracy what decommissioning costs will look like 25, 30 years from now, what salvage value will look like, and what recycling costs will be into the future. And that's why we've designed our plan to have these yearly reviews of recycling costs, of salvage value, and then just an annual review too to make sure the costs are in line with what people are seeing. It's possible that as more and more sites get decommissioned over time, we get a more accurate picture of what salvage value really is, what recycling costs are really like. We have those checks in our plan to incorporate those. We've also heard a lot of talk about using the salvage value, and I think I went over that. That's more of a policy decision. It's gone both ways in different jurisdictions.
Okay. So what we're looking at is that staff, your successor, future board, planning and zoning, or Linn County will every several years, whether it's in line with Mr. Fitzgerald's recommendation or concession of doing the recycling and the salvage discussions biannually, we'll be looking at these every couple of years. And let's say that the market does change where we estimate that the cost of decommissioning will exceed that 2.68. So for taxpayers or for the county, are there guarantees built in that ensure that not a penny gets spent of taxpayer dollars to remove a private installation?
So let's just go through a scenario. There's $1 million base bond, so let's take that into account first. Let's say 10 years from now we review the salvage value, and it turns out it's actually the $1 million plus the salvage value is not enough to equal the decommissioning costs. At that point, we would go and ask for a performance bond that equals that difference. If the applicant was not able to provide that performance bond, then the project would come back before the board, and the rezoning or the zoning layer could be removed, making the project, essentially it would have to be decommissioned at that point. Now, there could be a little bit of a gap there where, say, we've identified the $1 million bond plus the salvage value is $100,000 short. If for some reason the company who owns it at this time is not able to come up with that difference, then we would have to find a way to use the bond and the salvage value that is on site to decommission the project. So Mr. Fitzgerald suggested taking that 5-year time frame and reducing it to 2 years. The shorter that time frame is, the less the risk we have of incurring a financial gap there, because it's a more frequent review. If that's something the board is very concerned about, having to make up that gap, again, not using the salvage value would be a way to do that.
Okay.
So what's the bond look like without salvage value?
So it's currently $1 million bond, and they're counting, I think the salvage value they're saying is $7 million, and the decommissioning costs are $2.7 million. So right now, what they're showing is with the bond and the salvage value, the intrinsic value in that project is greater currently than the decommissioning costs.
I get that.
Mhm.
If we say that we don't want to use salvage value, like Wapello did not use salvage value,
2.7 million.
then the bond would have to be 2.7 million.
Just under, it's 2.68 million.
And that's what the actual cost is today of decommissioning,
That's,
as far as we know.
as best we can tell based on
Okay.
our third-party review, yes.
So, swing this around to 10 years from now, 15 years from now, take your pick, whatever year you want to use. Clenera's been gone, XYZ owns it. XYZ's not doing too good. They can't, a bond's kind of like an insurance policy, you have to pay on it, correct?
Correct.
They can't make the payment. I believe the way Luke explained it to me is you'd pull the permit, more or less, correct?
We would, yeah, the zoning district would be taken away or expired by the
Right,
Board of
right.
Supervisors, yep.
Okay, so we're left with it. And then we're just gonna say it stayed at 2.7. Everything stayed the same. Under the proposal we have now, that costs the Linn County taxpayer, well, actually, it should cost the landowner, in all honesty, in my opinion, they're the ones that signed into it, but if it costs the county, whoever, the remaining $1.7 million,
Assuming there's no salvage value, yes.
assuming there's no salvage value.
Right.
So why would we, this is more of an opinion, so if you don't want to answer it, I understand. I don't understand why we would want to take the risk of the salvage value instead of leaving it on them. I don't understand that.
That is an
And-
option the board can take.
Okay,
Anything else, Supervisor Zumba?
not right, not yet. Well, well, not on that topic. I got something on another topic, but we better dispense of this one first so we don't mess back you
Got
up.
it. Nope. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm probably going to call on Darren again. We've heard from the applicant. We've had staff opportunity to answer our questions as well as questions of the applicant. So now we're at third consideration. Can you walk us through so that we're not, do we need to make a motion to open third consideration before we have any discussions, or can we have discussions? Just walk us through the process, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I think at this point you have three major alternatives. Two of those with variances. One would be to go ahead and pass this ordinance on third and final reading, publish it becomes law. A second would be to discuss amendments, either decommissioning, setbacks, any other conditions that you want to add, and determine whether or not those are material and whether or not that's going to kick it back to first reading. And another option that you have is to postpone the final consideration. Again, there's no requirement that you pass this ordinance on its final consideration tonight. There may be many reasons why you want to give either Clenera, the neighbors, or staff additional time to look into something that you're asking them to look into. So you could postpone final consideration to a certain date. You set that meeting tonight, or you could postpone indefinitely, meaning that you're going to set that date at some future time. Indefinitely doesn't mean forever. It never happens. It just means that you're not fixing the date tonight.
Supervisor Walker.
Darren, you mentioned if there were changes or amendments, this board would have to determine whether or not they were material or substantive enough to revert back to a first reading. If it is the case that this board makes any amendments or changes and doesn't determine that they are significant enough to warrant a restart of this process, I guess in my mind, are there two alternatives? It could still postpone third and final, so we could deliberate on that and say we don't think these are material or substantive, and then say, next Monday, take a final vote, or we could take a final vote today, and it would be the board's discretion to determine whether or not those changes or amendments were material or significant. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So if Supervisor Rogers' chair opens up third consideration, we still have all options available to us.
You do. There would be one of several motions are in order. A motion to pass it on final consideration is in order. A motion to amend it is in order. A motion to postpone is in order.
So let me ask, as a parliamentarian expert, we had a lot of robust discussion Thursday into almost into Friday, where we talked about process. We heard from the applicant the challenges of the setback requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Could you walk me through a hypothetical here? If we wanted to openly discuss based on what we've heard from the applicant, any additions and or subtractions, if we wanted to remove those conditions, we could discuss that now.
Yes.
Without having to take any action.
Yes.
Would I have to open up third consideration in order to have a discussion on those, or even to postpone?
So if you want to discuss and possibly vote on changes to the ordinance, the motion that's in order would be a motion to amend the ordinance to remove the conditions or to add additional conditions. Second, and then debate that and dispense with it.
Okay. Can I ask a question quick?
Please.
If we've pretty much committed to having another meeting, I feel like.
Correct. On Thursday, we made it abundantly clear that
Right.
there was still enough discussion left, and we didn't have a lot of staff interaction with us at that time, that this would not be third and final. So I'm
Right.
not in any way
So-
wanting to make this third and final,
So
as much as I want it to be
I
third and
get
final.
I get that. So we, Charlie and I have had some confusion on how this works. We've worked some of that out this afternoon, along with Darren was there, Charlie brought up some other ideas. I think, I'm going to go back to that meeting that I suggested we have a moratorium, however that looked, whatever. But we all three, I felt that day, agreed that we needed to put what we wanted in this in a box, and basically would present that box to whoever the applicant is, and they could either do that or not. Now, we've done a lot of looking in their box, or them handing us their box, but I don't feel that it's worked the other way at all. But what I'm getting at is I think Charlie has got some other things the county has used to help with property values. The Solid Waste Agency was one that he mentioned, and a quarry. Actually, I was on planning and zoning when we did the quarry, I believe. We learned today from John Krasasik and Greg Bickle confirmed that the neighbors have gotten together and have something that they think will work all around. I want to stress that the three of us, none of us have said that this isn't going to happen. Obviously, two of them, we're not all on the same page, but nobody said no. But I think we need to give it due diligence, and the reason I don't believe it's been given due diligence, at least I don't feel I've been given due diligence, isn't because of anything you guys have done, but because of how I was originally told how this was going to work. It really hasn't followed that step at all. And so I would prefer that we just postpone it. We get all these things with Charlie. Charlie can come up, he can talk. I'd like him to talk about it, along with the height, along with the seed mix. That is important. Mr. Gallagher is our resident expert on that. And I know you guys, I'm from the farming world, so I understand there's zones and different species work in different areas and whatnot. And I just think we need to heed our department's recommendations, and that our department's recommendations is who we should lean on following. Not saying that we have to. I get it. You guys might want to go a different way, but I don't think we need to make any rash decisions on changing anything tonight. I think all the changes can be made at the next meeting, in my opinion.
Sure. Appreciate that perspective. I know at the beginning of this, we were presented with an option of doing a moratorium, and typically moratoriums are done when a county doesn't have an ordinance already on the books. It gives them time to investigate. And I think that there have been enough lessons learned going through this process that we would not have uncovered had we not. It may have just been maybe it would have been more streamlined, who knows? But I think going through this, we now have a lot more experience and sort of on-the-job knowledge of the complexities of industrial scale solar than we could have done if we all met together and tried to produce a nice product to hand off to an applicant and say, here you go. So we've already gone past that. But maybe a moratorium may be appropriate going forward to make sure things are in our code that make sense for future applicants, and whatever the legislature decides to do, the legislature decides to do. Supervisor Walker, do you have any comments?
Yeah, no, I appreciate all perspectives that have been shared, and I certainly appreciate the expertise shared with us by our staff. What I will do at this point is just kind of indicate where I'm at with all of this, and first and foremost, with respect to a moratorium, I don't think that's necessary. Supervisor Rogers, as you pointed out, it's typically been used for counties that don't have the expertise that we have or ordinances in place that we have. So I don't foresee ever supporting that, whether it's after this project or before this project. What I would also say is I've been reading a lot. I get emails from residents, concerned citizens, different interest groups on this, and lots of the concerns I feel like have been addressed by the applicant. There is a certain category of concern, though, that has to do with, and I believe some of these are happening in some of these discussions, that have to do with a financial remuneration or some sort of, how can I put this, financial award being made if this project encroaches so far on a person's property or gets as close to a person's property. And I just want this board to be careful when it comes to considering conditions of that nature, because it should not be the business of government to serve as a leveraging tool for residents with private business. So I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward. What I would also suggest is, given that we have had lengthy discussion on this, I'm not a fan of dragging this out any longer than it needs to be. I think a lot of the conditions or a lot of the concerns that this board has brought up, whether it's with panel height, setbacks, or decommissioning, I think have been addressed, and in my opinion, have been addressed thoughtfully. It is absolutely the case that there are residents who don't agree. And so I think this board is never going to get to a place where every interest group in this project feels 100% good about an outcome. So I just caution this board from falling into a cycle that could go on ad nauseum or ad infinitum, because we're trying to appease or please every single interest group. We have set out criteria for which industrial scale solar projects are to meet. They have met the criteria, and we have a recommendation before us from our Planning and Development Office to move forward with this. We've raised concerns about the decommissioning, and we've gotten some information on that. So I just want us to be careful, because I imagine concerned residents and applicants alike are ready for this to be resolved. So I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Well, to start with, I never said that I was not suggesting a moratorium. I said we postpone, that we not make any votes tonight is what I meant, and that we postpone any votes to the next meeting, that we look into other means of property protection, and that we look deeper into this decommissioning. And as far as your concern of this never happening, I can tell you straight up front that I know where there's a hog confinement building that is way closer than the suggested feet, because that person signed off on it, and that method does work, and I'm the person that signed off on it, so you don't have to worry. I own the house that falls closer to the feet than what it needed to be, so there's no need anybody coming up here and telling me that doesn't happen. I can show you the documents, not, obviously I don't carry them with me. I can also tell you that there's all kinds of different businesses that encumber people's land. That happens all the time. I'm also the recipient of having a pipeline that I wasn't too thrilled about, but at the end of the day, it was negotiated, and I have that. That happens every day out in the country, Stacy. It's just how it works. And in both those cases, it was not the participating person, but the other person that received some benefit for the I'm going to say property devaluation. So it does happen all the time. It's not a new idea. It's not anything. I mean, it just does work. And in this case, especially when we have, I think, and I was briefly showed it, but John talked about this today at our meeting. If the project can go, if Clenera can build their solar farm, I haven't voted no. I know everybody takes it. I'm just against it no matter what. That's not true. I'm a private property owner. Guess what? I don't want three guys sitting in front of a bunch of people telling me what I can do with my property either. I understand that. But there is a road for compromise here. I believe when two people from both sides have told me this, and they haven't been able to get with Clenera yet, so I'm willing. I think them are the people that need to work this out, and I think there's time to do that. And if that takes 3 days, fine. If it takes 4 days, fine. I'm not telling you can't do it. I don't see why we can't give them that time to do that. And if they can do that, it takes a whole lot of this away. And I don't understand why we would not let that go forward and see if they can do a thing. Now, granted, if you pretty much say, well, you can go negotiate, but it doesn't really matter, I'm going to vote for it anyway, well then, yeah, there gets to be what's the point. I understand that part perfectly clear.
So I want to clarify for you, Supervisor Zumba, I was not trying to indicate that private citizens, whether they live in a big city or rural area, can't enter into agreements with a private company. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be the job of government, whether it's local government, state government, or federal government, to intervene in a negotiation to give one party leverage over the other. And I'm also saying that we can take all the recommendations anyone wants to give us, but we are policymakers, and we have to balance interests that perhaps a small group of people negotiating something may not have to take into account. So I by no means am suggesting there's no value in hearing from residents who are meeting to come up with, we'll call them conditions that they can live with, by all means, but at the end of the day, we have a job to balance the interests of everyone in this community, to balance the interests, particularly with projects like this, to balance the interest of future generations who will benefit as this county moves towards more renewable and sustainable energy sources. So I'm not coming down on anyone here. I'm just saying we've got a responsibility too, and I don't think, as you have indicated in the past, we shouldn't work at the whims or at the service of a private entity, which I agree. We also can't always work at the whims or at service of other interest groups as well. We've got to take into account the business of this county as a whole.
Well, I don't think giving the citizens of this county a chance to negotiate their own deal is us interfering with anybody. That's who we should be letting do this.
So,
I would like to hear eventually from Charlie on the things that happened, or Darren, if he knows, at the landfill, or excuse me, solid waste agency. And the quarry. I believe the quarry is over on the west side of town.
Yeah, so 2006, I believe it was, 2004, 2006, when Site 2 on County Home Road, the Site 2 landfill reopened, the Solid Waste Agency passed a property protection document, I can't recall the exact name, that guaranteed a certain price to anybody within a certain proximity of that landfill once they sold. I believe, and it's been about 15 years, that it started with a baseline assessment. I'm sorry, appraisal, a baseline appraisal, and then down the road, if they sold the property, there was another appraisal, and the Solid Waste Agency guaranteed the difference.
Same with the quarry, or similar?
I'm not familiar with the quarry.
Darren did a pretty good job of explaining the property value protection program. Supervisor Zumba, when you put forward the 50-foot setback, I think one of the big pushes there was to try and mitigate property value loss. So this is a tool that the county has used before to try and mitigate property value loss. It's been used for the landfill and it's been used for quarries, and it works the way Darren explained. There's a baseline appraisal taken before the project is built, and then when a home is sold later on, if that homeowner feels that the project affected their value, they can have another appraisal done, and then the owner or the applicant basically makes up the difference if it is in fact found that the project has caused a decrease in home values. We've used this in the past because it makes sense, and it's something that is solid. We can try and guess whether or not a project will affect a value. It's hard to say, but with an appraisal, that is something that is real, and a licensed professional is offering an opinion. So that is one way to provide property value protection outside of setbacks. This is something that I think we've discussed before. The applicant is aware of this plan or this option. It's something that they've indicated I don't think they want to go down that road. It is, like I said, something staff have used successfully before for quarries and landfills. If there's any other questions from the board, I'd be happy to answer them as best I can on that, or you could ask the applicant about their views on that.
Sure. So while I have you, Charlie, I'll get to my question first, and then I'll give the public some context in terms of some of the discussion. You've probably been able to connect the dots, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. But with regard to my question, when we went from 300 feet to 1250, we had discussions about the impact to the footprint. Now, we're getting guidance here, or what we have to consider before us is if we make any changes at third and final, would those be considered substantive and material, even though those aren't spelled out in code? There's nothing that says 100 feet is substantial or 900 feet is substantial. But the size of, if we go back to 300, and let's say third and final, the footprint hasn't changed of the project.
Correct. 300 was what was initially
Sure.
applied with, so the footprint would not change.
And so there wouldn't be required any additional acquisition or lease of property. So the footprint is the same, the number of panels will be the same, virtually everything about and if we go back and change the height back to 18 inches, it's as if the application were in front of us for third and final, with some other caveats, right? The vegetation, and there may be something else that I'm just not forgetting right now. So the footprint hasn't changed. The setback distance would go, in this hypothetical, go back to its original state. I guess I'm really struggling with, and I know, is what is considered substantive and material. I'm not an attorney. I can't tell you if a judge, if this was litigated, would say, so you went back to the original number. I don't see how that's substantive or material change. So I just wanted to get on record that the footprint hasn't changed, the amount of land hasn't changed, even based on what is currently on the table. And then lastly, for the public's benefit, we were made aware this morning during our public meeting that there are some groups meeting, some that are for this project, some that are against this project or have severe reservations, and that they've been meeting to try and get to a win-win with each other. At least that is what was made reference to us, that they're
And
trying
I
to.
think they're also trying to work within the footprint of this project.
Sure. It was described as, some healing, hopefully, that goes beyond, that happens no matter what happens with this project. That conversations of healing and reconciliation certainly happen after this decision's made. But while I applaud those different groups of citizens, they're not negotiating with the applicant. So you can make all the demands you want, or you can negotiate among yourselves, but you are in essence asking a government entity to tell a private entity to negotiate with individuals that have taken upon themselves to come up with an idea, which is great, but at this stage I don't know what it'll accomplish or what the parameters are that we then have to take into consideration. So I'm not trying to limit citizens' ability to come up with creative ideas. It's just, if they're going to be asking for money, they're not asking the source of it to be at the table. It seems kind of counterintuitive to want to negotiate, but not have the other party, or informing the other party, or if you're going to make an ask of them, that they get a say in it. And that doesn't mean I'm on the side of a certain business or not. It just, if this was any other issue, I would think it's, and what the citizens asked us is to, if we did delay, to delay several weeks to allow for these negotiations to bear fruit. I don't know what they're negotiating. They didn't specify. I don't know if it's a dollar amount, a setback, vegetative screening, property value protection. I have literally no idea. But the request was made that we delay based on these ad hoc groups getting together. I don't know if that makes for better policy, but I know it's not part of my decision-making. It's not a criteria that is listed in our ordinance or in our policies in which to really consider. So it's kind of an ancillary consideration. So I wanted the public to be on board, so in case they weren't following that conversation, now you got it. Is there anything, Mr. Fitzgerald or Mr. McKee or Mr. Galago, that you've heard tonight that you wish to respond to or have comments on? We would love to get that perspective. Or we could take a recess if you need to. You want to recess to? Okay. May I also ask, during this recess, do we want to have this board have any conversations about if we were going to postpone and not take action tonight, what a future meeting would look like, so that if during recess they could come back to us with a time frame? I don't know of any travel limitations, or is that something you're interested in finding out?
You want to do that while we're recessing? Or
Yeah, kind of give them a task if
Sure, we can talk about whatever you'd like to talk about.
I'm going to have them recess. We're all going to recess. I'd like, if during recess, if we have a date in mind, which we haven't talked about, are we asking the applicant during recess to consider future dates?
I don't think we can legally talk about it while we're in recess, Ben.
That's not what I'm asking
Okay,
now. If we want to, let's just take a recess and we'll figure this out as we go along. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you could start making your way back, we'll reconvene. Okay, thank you all. I know that hopefully that was a productive recess. I think at the time we were asking representatives of Coggon Solar LLC for any comments, rebuttals, words of wisdom. So during that recess, I know that there were some conversations happening. If you want one of your representatives come to the microphone and respond to either your ability to be present for future meetings, and then we can maybe figure out offline those dates. That's really what the intention was to see if there's future dates in which you and your colleagues would be available, but also any of the comments that you've heard from staff tonight. So, Mr. McKee.
Okay. So the first piece I'd like to go into, and I guess Jared McKee, the first piece I'd like to go into is the comparison to facilities that are very inherently different than a solar farm. I know we've talked about this before, but again, a solar facility is very different than a hog farm, a waste management facility, and a quarry. There's no sound, there's no smell, there's no traffic. They're very different things. Also, as we talk about property and property values, when we talk about a solar facility, it has a fixed income. There is a fixed income. We have a 20-year contract. That contract does not change. Whatever consideration is put into this project, there comes a point in time when the revenues of a project cannot support the cost. I'm not sure if that's the goal, but there is a fixed income. We do not want a delay. We would like to move forward with the project. If we are available tomorrow, if there's a possibility for tomorrow or this week, because really what we're talking about are two very different things. We are talking about going through with the application as it was presented and having the board review the application, ask questions, learn more, and go through this process. That stands on its own. The criteria with which you are making a decision is based on the application. And then we are talking about something else, that we want to be good neighbors. I want to be a good neighbor. I want my neighbor in Boise, Idaho to have a good relationship, and I want my neighbors here in Linn County to have a good relationship with them. But the negotiations that we would make with our neighbors are completely separate from this process. They do not come together. We will still continue to have those negotiations. If this was approved tonight, I would still have those conversations. But they do not, they're not connected in any way. The criteria with which you are making a decision is the criteria that was presented on this screen, and that's what you have to be looking at. That's what the decision is based on. I can't express in any better way that I want to be a good neighbor. That's inherently why I got into this business, is because I want to do something good. Our availability is really, this has been a 8-month long process, and we are at a period of time where we can make a decision, and I don't see any new information coming into the board making a decision. We don't have a say in what you do, but our availability is this week. And if the board's decision is other, then we will provide dates that we can make, but we feel like there's no time to wait, and the decision can be made. With that, are there any questions or any other things that you would have of the applicant?
I'll ask my colleague, Supervisor Zumba.
Go ahead.
Supervisor Walker. I appreciate you uplifting that. I know that you've anticipated several of our meetings that have been on the calendar, plus one to be scheduled. I do appreciate that. We'll certainly take your and your colleagues' travel schedules into consideration as we consider a fourth meeting, but perhaps the third and final reading of whenever that is. So I do appreciate it. Thank you. Darren, anything from a staff perspective on any of the discussions that may have been happening and that could either help guide our discussions tonight or lend conversation for other items?
I don't know if these comments will help guide your discussion, but I did want to respond to a couple of comments I heard during the recess, or a direct question that I had about the board having conversations among themselves during the recess. Board members, a quorum of a Board of Supervisors can have discussions, and you can discuss ministerial topics, as Attorney Fagan pointed out during the recess. And so setting a date for a meeting is ministerial. You could have that discussion during recess. I wanted to address those questions because they were, I heard them during the recess, and I didn't want people leaving here thinking that there was a violation of open meetings. Discussing the date of a possible fourth meeting during the recess is not a violation of open meetings. If you were discussing the substance of a change, then that would be.
Got it. Okay. So we've had numerous discussions. I think, well, first of all, we've made it very clear to this audience and previous audiences that making this third and final was not our intention. As much as maybe we would like to be able to make it, and we have the ability to make a decision tonight. I think on Thursday at around about midnight, we all decided there's still some more information to be done. So taking a vote tonight does not make sense. That would make it third and final. Then it would be published, then it becomes an effective ordinance. I don't know if adding or removing amendments and conditions to from the previous two considerations makes sense. I think the best course, maybe the course that makes that's least painful right now, would be to postpone and figure out a date in which we're willing to reconvene, given the objectives and parameters in which we consider policy. I want to give any comments, time for my colleagues, what's their feeling on that, or sense of direction in which they want to take.
So I will add, we did indicate at the last meeting that this would not be the final vote, and so I think it's worth honoring our word in that respect. The big decision that I think we need to discuss is if we think the changes that we are making, whether we are adding or subtracting, are substantive and material, I think is the language. And I think that's at our discretion, because if they are, then we have to, if we're going to make those changes, then we have to have 3 additional meetings. Whereas if we believe any changes that are going to be made in the next meeting, which could be Thursday, Friday, Monday, whenever we set that meeting, that could be the end of it. So that's kind of what this board needs to determine, if any of the changes made are radical changes to the project or fundamentally change the project. What I have heard sort of discussed and put out there, everything from decommissioning to panel height and this, that, and the other, does not seem to me personally, I'm one voting member of this board, as a fundamental change, substantive, significant change. And it certainly wouldn't seem to me, if it was the will of the board to revert back to the original criteria, which was discussed publicly, that also doesn't seem like a significant change. So I think that's probably the operative decision the board has to make, whether or not we're going to have one more meeting and get all of our changes made and vote then, or if we're going to have a new series of meetings to discuss a new ordinance. That's kind of my read on where we're at.
Okay. Do you have anything, Supervisor Zumbaugh?
Well, just that I've been around the block more than I care to mention, and I don't see anything that you're going to continue to negotiate with anyone once we make this decision. So that's just, I applaud you for trying to go forward like that, but we both know that that's not going to happen. And from what I heard from today at the meeting in Charlie, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it was, from what I understand, pretty much, no, we're just going to keep putting it down the way we had it to begin with. Is that a fair way of putting it? I want to be fair, so yeah, come on up. I was not at the meeting. They weren't interested in any of the new ideas that we had.
Now, the communication from Coggon LLC, which they've been consistent here at the past few meetings, is they don't want to do the 1250 setback. They're willing to do 300 feet plus vegetative screening. They don't want to do the 28-inch panel height. They're willing to do 18-inch panel height with a seed mix from John Gallagher. And that is the message that they've communicated, to me, and I think as well at these meetings. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
It does. It does. So I think you can understand why I believe that what, in a nutshell, it's your way or the highway is what you seem to be putting toward us. and that our input really doesn't matter because you're just gonna stand forward, whether that's because you have a sense that it's gonna go forward or that's your crystal ball, I don't have any idea. But I really think that, well, obviously, we're not gonna vote tonight. I think that's a consensus between the three of us. And I don't think anything we've talked about either is a significant change that it would derail this, so.
And I appreciate those comments. And Supervisor Zumba, I wanted to, at the first meeting, I supported exploring the 1250 setback, whether it's to leverage negotiations or it was to really allow for 1,250 feet, which is standard for hog confinement lots, even though that's not necessarily applicable to this project, for it to have its day in the sunlight, so that no one can say we didn't explore it, that it wasn't discussed, that the project went forward without really knowing could they do 1250. I'll be honest, last Thursday, the applicants made a pretty compelling business case about 1250, and that if they wanted to proceed, it would require a lot more acreage. And for those who don't want prime farmland taken out of more production, farmland out of production than is necessary, that just sort of seemed like it was working that the 1250 was working against its what it was intended to do. They did make, I think, a good business case. They also really uplifted, even with our water and soil conservation director here, the 18-inch panel height, which at the first meeting, it was just 18 inches. At Thursday, or even now, we've learned at 15% of the day, the panel height would be at about the 18-inch mark. It brought out a lot of meaningful discussions on what this project is and what it's not, on should there be 1,250 foot setback, or should we revert back to the original 300? I know Supervisor Walker had a course of action that first meeting about not proceeding without all the information available. So I am glad that we did get to discuss the 1250. And I know for some people it will upset them that is not a reality. It was a discussion. We have moved on it. But they did make a compelling case about 300 feet. And just so everyone knows where we began at 50, which I think was completely unacceptable. And it would be if any of us lived 50 feet to anything that we didn't want near our property. So I appreciate that they came here from 50 to 300. I think that they have done some negotiating and they've made some concessions on their end, maybe not to the level that some people would wish. I appreciate and I applaud the out-of-the-box thinking that members of this very passionate community, both for and against industrial scale solar, are trying to get together to negotiate, to figure out circumstances that maybe are beyond their control that would make them feel better and sleep better at night about this project. The problem is that then we're sort of the intermediary. We're trying to have citizens negotiate terms and I assume payment, that we're talking about actual physical dollars for either a one-time cash payment or something else, and then wanting us to compel a private organization to pay these individuals more money than they were either offered or were going to get anyways. That just does not feel like that, to use your, when you say that that's sort of outside the purview of the Board of Supervisors, that is definitely outside of the purview of the Board of Supervisors to try and compel any private company to go back and pay people more who are already in contract with other people. It just that to me does not pass the smell test, nor is that anywhere near a win-win, nor does it make good policy. So I'm very much inclined to see this project succeed. I've listened to the 1250. That's not going to happen. I support the 300. They've made the case about the panel height. I appreciate the vegetation screening and the seed mix. So I'm not taking any action tonight, so I'll advocate that we postpone third and final consideration. To my other colleagues' points about Is there any other information that we can receive that will be beneficial tonight? I don't believe so. So to take an action would go against what we did Thursday. I have my calendar open. I don't know if my colleagues want to try and do this in public. If we were to schedule third and final, obviously it would require 24-hour notice, so we couldn't even meet until 7:30 tomorrow night, so I think that's out of the question. Charlie, if, we could meet Thursday or Friday.
I do
Yes,
have
sir.
one note to make about that. If we do want Blue Sky Productions to be here when we meet, if we do it this week, they are available Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday.
Also,
Are
Charlie,
you available next Monday? Are you available next Monday?
Charlie, also, I think you made this comment at our morning meeting that we have exhausted what has been appropriated to pay for rental space and AV for these meetings. So I think there was a question this morning if we were going to have a fourth meeting, and obviously it looks like we're heading that way, whether it's this week or next. Is it wise to just host the meeting at the Gene Oxley Center? And so I'm kind of asking my colleagues this, unless we want to figure out a way in the middle of our budgeting process to pay for another meeting out here.
And so just to be clear, these costs are not borne by Linn County with the audiovisual right now.
Right. We had the, I'll pause for a minute here. We had the increased application fee, an upfront application fee from Coggon Solar that was meant to pay for audiovisual, meeting space, and also for our third-party consultant to review their documents. We budgeted for 3 meetings. We did not budget for more. So if we were to hold this again here, use Blue Sky Productions, which they have been good to work with, we would have to find where that expense is coming from. Otherwise, you could explore holding it at the Gene Oxley building. I don't know what our capacity limits are at the moment for that building.
Okay, I mean, it's a cost, it's not a prohibitive cost, I assume,
No, I don't think it would.
for
We
the
just-
audiovisual.
Right, we'd have to discuss what fund it's coming out of, but,
Okay.
yeah.
So in our discussions this morning, for those who didn't tune in, we did have some discussions about future meetings. This was all in open session. So the applicant, part of the fee goes to paying for this. If we were to have it at the Gene Oxley Public Service Center, we obviously wouldn't incur those costs because we have our own audiovisual. But there is we wouldn't be able to fit this number of people into our buildings. It's just not, we don't have enough overflow. So I'm sure we can find the money to procure this vendor for Thursday. The question is, would this be a Thursday evening meeting, or would we want to?
I can't make Thursday.
You make Friday?
Well, really, I've got things every night, and I got things on Thursday of next week. But I don't have an open day this week.
Right.
Most of my days look like today, Ben, and you know what today was like for
Right.
you and I.
Yeah, it was pretty full.
Monday evening.
Well, that's the first day that I have that's really, truly available.
Would be Monday.
Monday, the 24th.
We could if we wanted. So for Clenera's representatives, I mean, now we're talking the 24th. We do have a scheduled board meeting at 11 a.m. We could keep that day very light and just have a regularly scheduled board meeting at 11, or we could be back here at 6 o'clock.
I think if we can't get it done this week, it's worth talking about at the top of next week. So Monday would be my preference if Supervisor Zamba is unable to attend Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
And just like with other sort of, for the benefit of the public, with other big issues, while board members have the ability to call into meetings, meetings that are this consequential, we'll say we try to all be there in person. So it's important that we take into account everybody's calendar in this way. So Supervisor, if you're saying Monday works, I know we've got a budget, do we have a budget meeting that day?
Yes.
Yep, I know we've got a 11, regular meeting and a budget meeting. But it would be my preference if we do have to push into next week to meet on Monday evening.
Okay, at 6 p.m.?
Sure.
Okay.
Or whatever time.
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. I understand it's not desirable for everybody, but Supervisor Zumba, you could be here for that date and time. I'm not asking for a commitment from Clenera right now. You could call in, you could be here in person. Sure, so just for the benefit of the audience, why don't you ask your question, Mr. McKee?
Do the meetings of the board have to be at night, or can they be during the day, during working hours?
Wonderful question. They can they can be both. The thing that we're trying to balance is our building, the G. Knoxville Linn County Public Service Center, holds only a certain number. Masks are required within our buildings. We do have chairs set up to comply with social distancing. We do have a few overflow rooms, but I don't know how well they're connected to the audio visual. So there's some logistical issues. One, we could easily do it.
Yeah, and if it has to be here, I mean, that we've already borne the cost for 3 meetings. I mean, we can bear the cost for a 4th.
So
The applicant can.
So another reason why, because I explained this the other day to someone too, we would do meetings after working hours is to give working people an opportunity to make
makes
the
sense.
meeting, because not everybody can, take time off in the middle of the day, and obviously this meeting is drawing a lot of attention, so we don't want to, we want to make sure we're giving people the best opportunity to sit in on the meeting. So with that in mind, I would respectfully ask my colleagues to consider keeping it at the same time or close to the same time
Yeah.
on Monday.
Monday the 18th.
I'm sorry?
Today's the 18th. Monday the 24th. Okay.
And thank you very much for your offer. Yes.
If one of our members is unable to
Completely
be here
fine.
physically, is it possible for us to be remote for at
Sure.
least some of us?
We could probably figure that out.
Yeah, we'll figure.
No?
Okay.
Charlie?
They're shaking their heads, yes.
Is that yes?
Technologically, I know it's possible, but I don't know if it's county that, what you all need.
Sure. We'll make it work. Either we'll have a microphone to a phone, or we'll figure out obviously a Zoom link. We can just maybe do a private Zoom link.
You get to speak.
We can figure that out. It'll be additional cost.
Okay. It can be worked out. Thank you. I know this isn't desirable for everybody, but it looks like Monday, the 24th, at 6 p.m. will be third and final, and we'll take action to conclude the process, or there's a multitude of votes that we could take.
Yep.
But it'll be listed as third and final,
That
correct?
is if this board feels like any of the changes that have come before us are not significant and material. It sounds like Supervisor Zumba doesn't believe they are.
Well, I don't believe changing, I mean, I'm adamant that, in my opinion, we shouldn't use salvage value, and I have hauled steel. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, I guess, but I've been to Stone Steady Iron when I just hoped that the check I would get would equal the gas I spent or diesel fuel I spent to drive there. Steel, obviously, at times is worth zero. So it will make a big difference on what time of the year and when you check those things out, Charlie, to compare the cost. It could very well be a time when that $1 million bond would have to be raised to 2.7 because steel's worthless. And it's not too long ago that steel was nearly worthless. I mean, probably within the last year.
There was also a time where, because of a steel tariff, one of our construction projects went up $300,000 overnight. So it's a commodity, it's a speculative market. It can change on a whim. And I appreciate the public's patience and endurance while we've gone through these discussions. I've been on the board a while. I'm certainly from this area, and this has been one of the more consequential, complicated, impactful projects to ever come before the board. This is a different animal than us recovering from two major disasters, the flood of 2008 and then the land hurricane in 2020, where we had to really look at how do we rebuild, how do we redefine ourselves. The reason why we're taking our time, and it may seem complicated, is because it is. There's a lot to consider. There's a lot to be mindful of, that this impacts people's viewshed, it impacts climate change, it impacts economic development, it impacts tax valuations, properties. So it's one of those that I won't feel bad at the end of this that we spent considerable time and resources listening, vetting ideas, and ensuring that we do this right. We owe it to the landowners who signed a contract. We owe it to the landowners who are adjacent to those who are participating. And as the gentleman, the last couple of meetings, I think his name was William, rightfully said, non-participating is a technical term in terms of not being in a contract, but they're participating in other ways, certainly. So when we say non-participating, it's not minimizing their participation. That we've got to get it right for the applicant, for our staff, and then future projects, as this will be what the bar is. And I do appreciate the public's willingness to hear us try and figure this out. It is complicated. It comes after long days and a lot of passionate public comment. So it sounds like we are in unanimous agreement, or I'm not hearing any objections, that the third and final consideration will be on Monday, the 24th, Monday at 6 p.m. in this building, with the ability for individuals from the applicant side to call in if need be, and then we can either approve third and final or make another decision afterward. Does that, Charlie, sound right? Darren, am I getting nods of approval here that we're?
Yes. To make the best public record, I would suggest that you actually make that a motion, take a formal motion and vote on a motion to postpone third reading of an ordinance as listed there until Monday, January 24th at 6 p.m. at this facility.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to that effect,
I will move the motion.
and I'll second for discussion. Is there any other further discussion? Okay. I'll call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion unanimously carries. Okay. We have exhausted all that I think needs to be exhausted on that topic. We will be meeting again for third consideration on the ordinance for the Renewable Energy Overlay District. But now is the time, unless, gentlemen, you have anything else you need to end with? Staff? Okay, then we'll move it to public comment. This is the public's opportunity to make public comment to the Board of Supervisors. You will have 5 minutes each. If you wish to make a public comment, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Cool. Yep, no worries. Swati, if you want to be first. If you could just state your name and address, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honorable Chairman Ben Rogers, Vice Chairman Louis Zampa, Supervisor Stacy Walker, county staff, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Swati Dandekar, 2731 28th Avenue, Marion. As a chairperson of Bright Future Iowa, I want to thank you on behalf of the 4,000 plus Linn County residents who signed our petition for conducting a thoughtful and thorough process, and for listening to the concerns of all speakers who are coming before you. Based on what we heard in the previous 2 hearings, it is in the best interest of Linn County that you approve the Coggon Solar Farm project next Monday. As someone who has held public office, I know that most decisions won't please everyone. But approving the Coggon Solar Farm is the best decision for Linn County and will do the greatest good for greatest number. That includes the 300 construction jobs, good-paying unions job. Bill Gerhard, president of the Iowa Buildings and Trade Council, endorsed this project. That's just the beginning. Manufacturers and others, new business interested in locating here always ask, what kind of renewable energy portfolio does Linn County offer? With Coggon Solar Farm, we will have a good answer. Approval of Coggon Solar Farm also reaffirms the fundamental principle of property rights, the rights of landowners to use their land as they see fit to provide for their families. The objections aren't from people concerned about what's happening on their own land. Whose choice should we be to harvest corn, soybean, or the sun? It should be up to each farmer. Preventing some farmers from harvesting the sun because their neighbors do not like it undermines the rights for all of us. I would point out the concerns of neighboring properties has been addressed by the county. The 300-foot setback already recommended by county staff is a larger setback than what is required in most jurisdictions. Expanding the setback, a poison pill that threatens to kill the project and all the good it would do for Linn County, would require the removal of more acres of agriculture land, something opponents of the project say they are against. And I'm really glad that you are seeing that, Supervisor Rogers. We also cannot forget the benefit to all of us in having a source of electricity that will offset 300 million pounds of carbon dioxide. That is reduction in emission that helps Linn County achieve our county-wide carbon reduction goal. Finally, the power generated by Coggon Solar Farm will flow to Linn County homes and businesses through SIPCO and Linn County Rural Cooperative. Again, on behalf of Bright Future Iowa and the 4,000 people who want solar in our county, I thank you for listening to us, and again, I will recommend that you support the Coggon Solar Farm for greater good of Linn County. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ambassador Swadekar. Other public comments?
Good evening. My name is David Osterberg. I live in Mount Vernon, Iowa, 318 2nd Avenue Northwest. And I'm speaking as an employee, I guess, of Common Good Iowa, and also as a former professor of public health at the University of Iowa. And I want to speak on the 300-foot setback. Generally, when you talk about setbacks, there's often a health and safety reason for that. When you talk about confined animal feeding operations, I've actually given you a couple of, given Darren a copy of this, and there's lots of things that say, yes, there is a health effect to neighbor from large confined animal operations. That's why there is a setback. Unfortunately, it's only a setback for the large ones. If you get more than 1,000 hogs, and it's called small, then you can be right up next to a neighbor. And unfortunately, you supervisors cannot change that because the legislature took your rights away in that sense. Also for wind turbines, and I've also done a paper on that I cite here, these things can fall over. They can lose a blade. Having 1,000 feet back makes sense for health and safety reasons. But when it comes to solar power, I cannot figure out a reason why you need to have a gigantic setback, because there seems to be no health and safety consideration. Possibly there are aesthetics, but I think you solve that better with vegetative buffers and things like that rather than getting really far away. You're not going to get far enough away if you had 3 miles for some people. That's not what you need to do when it comes to setbacks. So to the extent that you want to do setbacks for health and safety reasons, 300 is as good as any other number, and that's what you started with. So I would recommend you go back to that, because at least it's based on something that your planning department thought reasonable. I'm not sure it's reasonable. I think it's too big, if anything, but it's certainly not too small. So going back to the 300-foot, which discussion now seems like you may want to be doing, I think it's a great reason to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osterberg. Greg, good evening.
Good evening again. No sign-up sheet, so I'm Greg Gerdes. I represent the Robinsons. I live and work in Iowa City, 105 Iowa Avenue, number 234. I'm glad you're talking about the bond. There's some details you need to address regarding the bond. What's all going to be covered by it? Is it going to just be decommissioning? I hope not. A lot of neighbors had concern about storm debris. Does the bond cover the storm debris? There was talk about other concerns. Does it cause damage to tile? Does it cover that cost if the repairs aren't made? I hope so. It needs to be. In addition to decommissioning, you're talking about that, but that's chasing a real hard number to pin down, because we're dealing with something that's going to be, 30, 40 years down the road. You got to err on the side of caution. You got to protect the taxpayer and the neighbor. You got to require that bond be prepaid in full and not just yearly premiums. Some construction bonds, most construction bonds, go for a relatively short period of time, perhaps 2 years for a major project. You need to find somebody who's willing to sell a bond for 30 years that covers all of those things that I've described in addition to just the decommissioning. Otherwise, you've not accomplished anything. I urge you to let the neighbors and the other affected people weigh in on the criteria that bond specifies. Please do not rely on just your staff and the applicant to agree upon what acceptable bond terms are. That bond is for the protection of the neighbors and the taxpayers. They should have a right to participate in that process. Secondly, and I think this is important because it gets back to that material and substantial change that we were talking about. When you saw the Clenera slide, perhaps you noticed that the project has changed. They've relocated where the panels are going to go. Perhaps when the Clenera folks are up here again, they'll point that out to you. But in the latest slide, there were no panels directly south of the substation. Instead, they were moved to the bottom end of the project. Okay? Is your staff aware of that? That would be my question to staff. Has the impact of that change been considered? What about floodplains? What about drainage? What about all of the other things that we've considered? We're dealing with a shifting target. I haven't had a chance to look at it. My clients just noticed it for the first time when the slide was up. They certainly haven't had any input. And I think perhaps the neighbors who are most affected by this site, by this change, are going to come up here and explain why they feel that that's really not the best thing since sliced bread, okay? Lastly, I want to get back to the 1,250 square feet set, or 1,250 foot setback. If the senator and the representative who were here last week are right, you have the real risk of losing everything if you don't make that a requirement. They told you, and they certainly can do this legally, is take away your rights as far as what to require. It seems to me that the only way you're going to save this project is if you get something that's acceptable to all that are concerned. Okay, and maybe electricity rates are going to have to go up. Maybe SIPCO is going to have to pay more for the power that they buy. But that's just the fact of life. Lastly, Supervisor Rogers, you expressed the concern that if the site is broadened because of this 1,250 foot setback, it needs more land, that's going to be taking even more land out of production. Correct observation. The reason you are in that dilemma, sir, is because you have violated your comprehensive plan. If you would have cited this project on poor farmland, you would not have that dilemma which you have foisted upon yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
Hello again, my name's Quinn Slavin. I'm the Iowa Field Director for the Land and Liberty Coalition. I'll keep this incredibly brief, but I would just like to commend all of you for your foresight, because the setbacks, the original compromises of 300 feet and the 18-inch panel height, Clenera pointed out that it makes this project very difficult and possibly impossible to extend those to 1,250 feet. But what it would also do is send a clear signal to any solar potential projects that Linn County is not open for business. So I feel returning to the 300-foot setback and the 18-inch height definitely indicates that you plan to remain committed to the comprehensive plan and remain committed to affordable, clean, homegrown energy. So thank you, and I commend you.
Thanks, Quinn. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Doug Schmidt. Me and my wife Norma live on the east edge of this proposed project. We were sitting looking at the presentation on the slides, and the boundaries, where they're locating the panels, has changed. Nobody's ever talked to us. Nobody's ever talked to us. As far as we know, we don't even know what's going on because nobody's had contact with us. But if Clenera is able to arbitrarily just change lines, you know, if they presented a plan, they presented a plan. Now we're going to change the lines. But the 300 feet, I think, is an absolute minimum. First, it's not as much. I would like the 1250, but there's the idea that 300 feet is there, but when you look at that slide, they've taken that away from us. When they moved it down from the power station down south, right up to our place. Right up to our place. You can throw a rock and hit it. That's not 300 feet. So if they can change the rules, I guess, I hope not. To some degree, you guys have to help us. There's no such thing as a non-participating landowner. We're all participating. We're the first ones, the non-participating, quote, unquote, we're the first ones to get taken advantage of. We happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time for this project. We're not doing anything other than raising our families and just living our lives, and this comes along, and we don't have a say in it. and some of the discussions that have been made, it's like we're getting to be a nuisance to the board. Well, you guys just have to adjust to the idea that you got to do what there's a quote greater good. You know, we got to take care of Clenera. Well, we do have rights too, and I hope you don't lose sight of that. I really do hope that. And I guess in closing, there has to be some kind of setback, in my opinion, and 300 feet is the absolute minimum. I guess in my mind, there's numbers between 300 and 1250. Something, you talk about compromise, which is a big word, I understand that. But there's numbers between 300 and 1250. I know what the project company says, well, if we have to change it, we can't make enough money. We can't make as much profit. Sometimes I find that hard to digest. How much is enough? But I thank you for your time. And
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Next, sir. Good evening.
Hi. I'm Wally Taylor, 2200 South 31st Street in Marion. This is an extremely important issue, and I really appreciate you folks taking the time and the effort to try to sort all this out. It's difficult because, on the one hand, climate change is real, it's here now, and we need to transition to renewable energy as quickly as we possibly can. And solar projects are one clear way to do that. It's unfortunate and it's sad that Clenera has been required to be dragged kicking and screaming to even come close to doing what is necessary to make this project acceptable. That always seems to be the case when a private company is performing a public service. Their motive is profit. Their motive is not the public interest. And that's what that's what you folks need to focus on, is the public interest. There have been three issues that have come up repeatedly. One is the decommissioning plan. In fact, at the Planning and Zoning Commission, I'm the one who got up, another person also did, and said the Clenera's initial plan was not sufficient. They were gambling on whether or not there'd be enough salvage value at the end of the 30 years or whatever the period is to pay for the decommissioning costs. And that's ridiculous. So now we have a decommissioning plan that still depends to some extent on the salvage value. It seems to me that the Clenera can do what nuclear plants do, what other industries do, and have a fully funded decommissioning fund and not gamble on the salvage value of the equipment after 30 years or so. So I'd ask you to not approve that decommissioning plan, but demand a better plan. The second issue is the height of the panels. I certainly support raising the panels so that we can have native prairie grasses under there. I don't think, at least I didn't hear any clear reason why Clenera cannot do that, other than perhaps the cost. But they need to do it right. They can't come in here on the cheap and do it wrong. They need to preserve this land. And one good way to do that is to plant native grasses so that the soil is built up. So when it does go back to farmland, you have good, fertile soil. The third issue has been the setback or the impact on the neighbors. And I've been to every meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, your 3 meetings, and I'll be another one apparently. And with all due respect to the neighbors, I have not heard any real reason why there needs to be that setback. This, as someone said, it's not like a hog confinement. It's not like even a wind project where there are big turbines and there's some noise and there's some shadow flicker. It seems to me that the buffer of trees or whatever would be sufficient. I certainly don't want to, as I say, denigrate the neighbors, but I think that maybe all told, that would be the best result here, to have a buffer that would protect the neighbors from having to see the solar project. So with that, I commend you for the work you've done here, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Hi, Kelly.
Evening. My name's Kelly Murda, and I live at 4194 Quail Ridge Road in Center Point, Iowa. You've already brought up one of the things that I was going to talk about tonight. It's the salvage value. I had actually gone through the transcript where Mr. Thompson, he's not here tonight, from Clenera had stated at that IUB meeting that sometimes decommissioning plans do not factor in any salvage values. He went on to say, case in point, Wapello. Our decommissioning plan on Wapello had 0 salvage value credit associated with that. So as I pondered this between last week's meeting and this week's meeting, I thought to myself that Wapello is in Iowa. Wapello was developed by Clenera. Wapello was built by Res. They were here, they were talking to us. SIPCO has a power purchase agreement for the electricity coming off of Wapello. Wapello is a 100 megawatt facility. Coggon's in Iowa, developed by Clenera, built by Res, PPA with Coggon, or with SIPCO, 100 megawatt facility. So what's the difference? When Clenera submitted their plan to Louisa County, did they not have that in there? Did Louisa County stand back and say, yeah, no, that's not right for us? Why does it play out different in Linn County than it did in Louisa County? Why is the county willing to accept such a risk to the taxpayers for decommissioning? What other companies would the county step in and allow that for? I don't get it. I don't understand it. So I'd like to understand that at the end of this process. If you decide to leave that salvage value in there, help me understand what's different about Linn County than Louisa County, because it seems the same to me. I also just wanted to throw in a quick comment about the IUB meeting again, where Clenera, it's in the transcript. They said if Linn County requires us to clean it up, if it's in writing somewhere, we'll do that. So please don't miss that. You know, if we're only gonna have 300 feet, give us something so that if there's a natural disaster, that there's an assurance and there's funding that that's gonna get cleaned up. And then I just wanted to leave tonight identifying the irony. These guys came before the board a week and a half ago and requested a delay. They weren't ready. They needed 2 or 3 more weeks. And then Jared stood up here tonight and said, oh, that doesn't work for us. That's super ironic to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Alicia Porter, 3253 Fishel Road, Marion. I've been in real estate for 21 years, and there's been a lot of concern and pushback as to if properties will be affected near an industrial solar project. I will state again that yes, property values will negatively be impacted. I've done a lot of digging to find some comps near Marion by the landfill, and I use that example because Mr. Rogers specifically brought that up at the last meeting Thursday night and didn't think that it had an impact on surrounding properties. Looking from the outside, it may not appear to, but you'll see by the spreadsheet that I provided in the comps and the multiple pictures that all 3 properties were sold in 2020 and had very different conditions, but similar attributes such as bedrooms, baths, amount of land, etc. Out of respect for the current owners of those properties, I will not share the addresses out loud, but have labeled them Comp 1, Comp 2, and Comp 3 for your knowledge and comparison. As you'll see, Comp 1 is the farthest away at 2.2 miles. There's multiple pictures there, and as you can see, it's average to below average condition. It sold for $240,000 in 36 days. Comp 2 is 1 mile away from the landfill and sold for $187,149 days. It did have some nice upgrades, but it was considered to be average condition. Comp 3 is the closest at 0.7 of a mile from the landfill, and it originally was on the market back in 2007, was unable to be sold, and unfortunately went back to the bank. The bank sold it in 2008 for $97,000. Somebody purchased it from then, and that owner completely remodeled it recently, as you'll see by the pictures. New windows, siding, roof, new kitchen, tile backsplash, granite countertops, new flooring, new lighting, and the list goes on. You basically have the perfect hobby farm with a brand new home, and it still took 47 days to get under contract and sold for the purchase price of $229,500. So Comp 1 was the farthest away out of the comparables, but was at average to below average condition and still sold for more than the one that was completely remodeled, had more outbuildings, just because it was missing the blessing of the golden rule in real estate. Location, location, location. This is a prime example of how industrial solar will negatively impact surrounding properties. As you've heard directly from many neighbors, this is one of the big reasons they don't want to live next to one. I spoke to a couple of appraiser friends of mine since the last meeting, and both were in agreement that industrial solar would have a negative impact on surrounding properties. It's called external I can't pronounce it. External inadequacy. One of those appraisers said that the range of impact would range anywhere from 2% up to 20%. The percentage would be determined by the amount of the property. The higher the price property, the more impact that it would take on. There was a lot of talk from the solar company about moving goalposts. Let's stop and think about all the surrounding neighbors that poured their life savings into their dream property, and now it's being proposed to have it negatively impacted. Yeah, you can sure say the goalposts are being moved, and those homeowners are fully invested already, but not being fully considered. I expect a lot more out of the Linn County supervisors to serve and protect all of our rights. Solar can be put anywhere, and to have the least amount of negative impact, put them on rooftops. If you took the time to review the 15-year independent study I provided last meeting, it backs these statements. Mr. Walker, you made the comment last meeting, and I don't have your specific words, but basically to the effect, it's not our job to make things fair for everyone. We are asking you to make things fair for your constituents and not worry so much about the solar company. We are invested. We have deep roots in Iowa and have been here at the meetings expressing to you that there are other places to put these solar panels. We're not against solar and the benefits. We are against taking valuable farm ground out of production for 30+ years. There are other options that would need to be considered and make sense for everybody. I'm asking you all to take all of us in consideration. We can and will be a leader in solar industry, but we need you to be the leaders that you were elected to be and stand up for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia, just real quick, this will become a public record and there are addresses on here. Are you fine with that?
And you can look it up on the assessor site.
Yeah, you
it
said
is
you weren't going to
public
publicly
knowledge.
list them. I'm just saying
Yes, that's
this will become a public document, so.
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Hey, Mike.
Good evening, supervisors and the public. Mike Carberry, Iowa City, Iowa, People's Republic of Johnson County. I'm a former county supervisor down there, and but I've been in the solar renewable energy business for over 20 years and in the ag policy business for just as long. One thing that I've learned is that good policy makes good projects. And you've got two projects really before you right now, the Coggon project and the Dwayne Arnold project. And I'm here to tell you, last week I was here and I gave you a copy of the Johnson County Solar Ordinance that was updated last August. And it's pretty good, but it's not great. And what they've done is they've actually put a moratorium in December on that ordinance until June of this year, because they kind of want to see what you guys are going to do and some of the things that come up as you go through this process. And I thank you for going through this process, and it's kind of exposed some of the things that we really need to take a look at, and I think that Johnson County will take a look at. Their decommissioning plan in there is not beefy enough. It needs to have in writing what exactly needs to be done, and that money needs to be there. Some of the other things that you've talked about, I don't even think are in there. A disaster plan. You know, we've had 2 derechos in 2 years. What happens? Who pays? All of that needs to be put in writing. And then, of course, you know, some of the other things, the vegetative buffer, which is so important. And what they don't have is they just say you need a vegetative buffer. Well, I could go out and plant a couple saplings all along the fence. Take 10 years to get to it where it's a view screen. Well, they sell 8-foot trees. So put in 8-foot trees. Some of those things need to be taken a look at. Now, it's kind of hard to change horses in the middle of a stream. So I applaud you for holding the feet to the fire of Clenera and NextEra, and everybody else is going to come before you. But I suggest that after these 2 projects are kind of in your rearview mirror, take a step back, take a deep breath, and consider beefing up your solar ordinances, and maybe even taking the same thing that Johnson County did, and maybe a moratorium. But get through these projects. You've done, this is the 3rd public hearing that I've been to, and I think the process has gone well. I applaud you for taking a look at a bigger setback, but we've realized that maybe that would kill the project, and that the 300 foot is 6 times more than Johnson County requires. So I think 300 foot's a pretty good deal, and I would take it. And so thank you very much for your deliberative process. Get through this, step back, and maybe reevaluate where you are. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bickle, how are you?
Greg Bickle, 2250 Coggon Road. Let's talk about setbacks. The 300-foot setback absolutely benefits no one. Okay? Look at the maps. All of that 300 foot is encumbered by the property owner's own property. It does nothing. 0. Now, on that 300-foot setback, the only person in that whole project area that benefited was me. You have talked about we don't want the government setting a standard that allows the homeowner to negotiate. But I'll tell you right now that 300-foot setback that you gave me, Clenera already tried to negotiate. The 50-foot setback to property line could already be negotiated, whether you like it or not. Over the weekend, so last meeting you gave me some homework. Let's see if we could come up with something that didn't kill this project. I went to all the neighbors on Sunday after the snowstorm. I discussed everything that's going on with the setbacks. I discussed the possibilities. The 1,200-foot setback is not just about fleecing Clenera. It's about negotiating viewshed. It's about negotiating screenings. It's about negotiating a place on the property that works for the non-participating property and also works for the developer. So I talked to all 8 homeowners. 4 of them are here before you now. I talked to them and discussed the issues, and they were all in agreement. They would do reasonable things to ensure this project was not killed. The setbacks, and I commend you for the 1,250 setbacks. We didn't set that. The 300 foot does us nothing. The 1,250 foot, it does something to keep it further away. Keep it further away for our property value, as we have heard. It keeps it further away from fire damage or from storm damage. So there is benefit other than a hog lot, other than a windmill. You heard from Representative McClintock and Senator Zumbaugh. I have been working with Mark Frank and John Zakrasik, who represent Linn Area Clean Energy District. I have done extensive setback analysis for Coggon and Palo to see what the setback would mean for non-participating landowners. I've done more than this. I've used Google Earth. I am a full-time software developer. I can analyze things online. I can see what scenarios work. Screening doesn't work for some people. Screening in my case wouldn't be needed, but other things would benefit me. So there is some negotiation there, and that's what I think the negotiation is about. Clenera has made no attempt after the 1,250 was announced to negotiate with any of the landowners. I took that upon myself, and lo and behold, I was able to come up with something that still made the project go through. Now, I originally was against solar, correct? I didn't want it. And your own commission said 6-1 to deny it. We are in the place we are now where I'm saying, let's negotiate, let's come up with something that works for everyone. The 300-foot setback does not work to occupied structure. It does nothing for any of those 7 landowners but me. I feel guilty if I negotiate with Clenera to get rid of that. I don't want to do that, but yet there needs to be something. Rather than the 300-foot setback, another option is 300 foot to property line. There are 6 properties within the target area that do not have protection under the 1,250-foot setback because they do not have a house like I do. That would give protection for those property owners if they wanted to sell that land and somebody wanted to build a single-family dwelling on that. The last thing I want to say is, Ben Rogers, Supervisor Rogers, you said the board may make substantive changes to the language of the ordinance, and that the first and second consideration, substantive changes for whom? Because I'm a landowner, and that 1,250 that has already been approved is a substantive change for me and the other landowners in the area. I would say, please, let us negotiate something. We've already done it ourselves. Let's talk to Clenera. If Clenera is willing to come to the table, we don't want to kill the project. We want to heal the community and put everything back together. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, Laura. Good evening.
Laura Robinson, 2094 Linn, Delaware Road, Coggon. Board of Supervisors, I respectfully state, I don't believe many of the comments the applicant Clenera has said throughout this process. Remember, they're an out-of-state for-profit company, and they're now owned by Enlight, based in Tel Aviv, Israel. Few of the examples of misinformation, I'm just going to share a few. We have seen many changing maps of this project. Way back in March 9th of 2021, I called project manager Lane Ashton because I noticed a blue rectangle on a map that I hadn't seen before. It was between the substation and Ken Ludolf's property. I asked what that blue rectangle was, and his response was, it's a printing error. Not true. We found out later it was a laydown area directly across the road from sister-in-law Paula Robinson's home. Another map, the laydown area was gone, it was moved. Tonight we have a new map. We have panels where there never were panels before. Some of these homes have never seen this map until tonight, these residents. Please keep that in mind. At a technical review meeting, November 15th of past year, I once again noticed a slide that Mr. Fitzgerald used in his presentation, again of a laydown area on a participating landowner's property. I mentioned that to the landowner and that Clenera was going to use the ground next to his house. And the landowner addressed Mr. Fitzgerald and he told him, well, that ground had not been committed to Clenera. Mr. Fitzgerald's reply was, well, oh, we'll have to change our maps. Well, I'm glad I caught that for the landowner. November 29th, 2021, Planning and Development Commission meeting at the Linn County Fairgrounds. Mr. Fitzgerald quotes, if one of the participating landowners decided not to participate, Clenera no longer wanted them to participate in the project, they would be relieved from doing so and we would proceed. Now remember, that's on public record, but they now say they misspoke. I'd hold them to their words. At the same meeting, Mr. Fitzgerald said, we have reached out both directly and indirectly to the neighboring landowners to ascertain the location of their tiles, and we have not received a response to date. Completely not true. They have not reached out either directly or indirectly to any of us yet. And speaking of reaching out, sister-in-law Paula, who has mentioned this several times, has never been contacted by Clenera. Raising the panels 10 inches, as Mr. John Gallagher, our Linn County Resource Conservationist, on the Technical Review Committee suggested, they said it was cost prohibitive. I question whether we should be doing business with a company that can't do that. You know, there are other solar companies in the country. Board of Supervisors, please, you are in charge, not the applicant. The 1250 setback is crucial. It helps protect our view shed, helps protect our homes from storm debris. We are against this project, but the setback gives us a little bit of tolerance. Oh, and one last note. Last Thursday's slide presentation from SIPCO listed drainage engineer Don Etler as retired and part-time. We had never met Mr. Etler, but we were told he was the premier drainage engineer in Iowa. He has been instrumental in helping draft significant portions of Iowa drainage law. He does know what he's doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Mr. Robinson.
I'm Tom Robinson from 2094 Linn, Delaware Road, Coggon, Iowa. And there's before I get started, everybody's talking about we can plant some trees or whatever. When SIPCO redid the substation right outside of our house in 2015, they came to us and they said, yeah, we're going to do you this really big favor. We're going to plant, 30 or 40 trees. That was in 2015. You know what? I walked out there this afternoon. They weren't there, so they didn't threaten to arrest me. But those trees they're 7 years old now. They're just past knee high for me. That's garbage. They'll be 30, they're crap trees. Anyway, my speech that I wanted to give you was, it deals with what was said about my family last Thursday evening. I was irritated, really irritated by the SIPCO presentation. We were told at the Board of Adjustment meeting on December 29th that the SIPCO substation expansion must be considered separately from the Coggon industrial solar proposal. The public meeting procedures seem to change to advocate the developers. But we agree that Coggon industrial solar, the SIPCO expansion, and the easement rights obviously tie together. SIPCO claimed last Thursday that their actions in rerouting a drainage easement owned by my brother and my sister were, quote, reasonable. What they didn't say is that their actions were illegal under Iowa law. That is not reasonable, and Linn County officials cannot accept it as being reasonable. SIPCO removed this property and rerouted it. It's our property. We have an easement. They rerouted it without permission and without adequate engineering, and repairs have not worked, despite what they said on their stupid little slide presentation. SIPCO continues to act as if this property is theirs, with complete discretion to make changes. Just because your car is stolen and taken to a chop shop, it doesn't mean that ownership has changed. We're very disturbed by SIPCO's statement, quote, "The Robinsons refused to let SIPCO investigate on their property or scope their field to the north." That was a lie. That was absolutely, positively not true. It was a smear to us. SIPCO contacted us with less than 2 days' notice asking for access. Our attorney requested to their attorney that the inspection be scheduled when my brother would return. He was on a business trip to South America. Having the property owner on site could have helped protect all parties. But to accommodate SIPCO's hurried request, I changed my schedule, and I was there to cooperate with the engineer and SIPCO's personnel. My brother, who is in Argentina, gave permission by phone to his tenants to help the engineer dig up with a backhoe. On the exact day and time SIPCO requested, the engineer inspected the tile on the Robinson property. Any request made that day was allowed at our inconvenience, but it was convenient for them. But they continued to lie on that stupid slide set they put up there last week. My wife and I own a drainage easement that connects to this same line. It runs north-south the length of the northeast 40 acres of this industrial proposal. And okay, again, that slide that they showed up, everything's changed. How can you guys possibly go ahead? How can you possibly go ahead? That slide, nobody has ever seen that before, at least not to my knowledge. Nobody that's directly affected by that. This shows a whole different corridor than ever has been up there before. These guys, they're difficult. I don't understand how this project can possibly go ahead. We've offered to negotiate on that 1,250-foot setback, and we just get shot down. These guys have never approached us. I don't understand. We're the taxpayers. We've lived here for 42 years. We paid. I don't think we're behind on our taxes. Are we doing something wrong? Why don't we? You guys, you two especially, seem to have made your minds up that this thing needs to happen. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Sarah? Okay, thank you.
My name is Sarah Alden, 4124 Greens Grove Road, Center Point. This process has been really enlightening for me. I've often heard Ben say, decisions are made by those who show up. I used to be inspired by this statement, and I connected with it. Today, I'm disheartened by the process. There's a clear bias in favor of the developer and the county's willingness to accept their claims blindly for the sole reason being we want solar energy. They are going to tell you what you want to hear. They are the ones that stand to make the millions of dollars from approval of this application. Money is the motivator here. The county should be cautious. Coggon Solar isn't a status quo permit application compared to what the county sees daily. No one in Linn County has experience with utility scale solar development. We don't expect you to know what is needed, but we do expect you listen to the work and work through community concerns. Residents are concerned about many elements, most of which I believe boil down to two main categories: scale of the development and improper siting. I want to talk to you about scale. On February 11th, 2014, there's a memo addressed to the PZC members, so the Planning and Zoning Commission members. I gave that to you just a moment ago. In the document, it notes that there was a sense of urgency to develop language for utility solar installations due to the knowledge of an application for a 476C renewable energy tax credit through the state of Iowa. This was the premise for developing the solar ordinance. With information provided from Planning and Development, I learned that the two potential looming utility developments were 2.5 megawatt facilities, one in Linn County and the other in Johnson County. We were preparing for 20-acre development. There is a huge discrepancy in scale between 2.5 and 100 megawatts. It's a 730-acre difference, or approximately 1.25 square miles. This level of scale impacts all aspects of the code, from setbacks to decommissioning bonds, property taxation. It is in replacement of tax, not in addition to tax. So when people sign up for land, that goes to the state, and you guys are only going to get tax on the electricity generation piece of it. At the beginning of the process, a moratorium was declined. Stacy and Ben felt comfortable being able to introduce conditions throughout the application process and learning through the process. At the June 29th Board of Supervisors meeting, Stacy said, for all applicants for utility scale solar is to make requests and conditions for property value guarantees and for setbacks to better understand environmental impacts and to better understand the economic impacts. Those are conditions that can be set on any applicant at any time. Stacy also expressed that if residents are unhappy with the code, it was our job to come and say that we are not satisfied. Residents have come forward. Your county attorney recommended that code changes be made prior to the receipt of an application to avoid litigation. At the Coggon Solar meeting this past Thursday, Ben, you stated that it would be unfair for this board to move the goalposts on an applicant referencing changes to setbacks because they've already prepared for 300-foot setbacks. This is in direct conflict with the reasons given for denying a moratorium. The Board of Supervisors meeting on June 29th was a memorable one. There were lots of members of the public who showed up, residents, developers, attorneys, the union. Everyone was there to listen to the flexibility that this process was supposed to offer so that we could focus on getting good code and doing it right. The philosophical outlook that was proposed is not what happened. Developers are driving the bus and you are allowing it. They are telling you what they will do based on industry standards. Developers are the ones who wrote the industry standards. Developers will only do what is minimally required of them, and that is it. There is no implying or interpretation. It needs to be crystal clear. If Clenera won't concede to what is required, they will go somewhere else. So what? We've got another developer here today who has 6,347 acres of land leased for development in Linn County. This county is not at a loss for renewable energy development. You do not have to approve this project. We need to take time to sort out community concerns, including those of rural residents. Future generations will have to pay for your unwillingness to take time to develop a stronger ordinance for our county. These include all elements you've already received feedback on, including facility structure, decommissioning process, the bond funding, disaster recovery, setbacks, emergency response plans, and developer transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I saw some other people coming up to the microphone. Good evening.
Nancy Petrilla, 3796 Alice Road, Toddville. As usual, I'm not going to make a lot of comments. I've got questions, which I don't expect an answer to, just would like for you to think about. I've heard it mentioned several times that companies require clean energy to come here. I'm curious why. I thought we had a lot in employees and people and environment that we could offer to companies. Is clean energy the only reason they're not coming? Maybe we don't really need them. I can see it being part of it. I believe it was indicated in maybe the first meeting that SIPCO, I believe SIPCO's one that said that they would expand the battery storage at Coggon if this passed. I kind of thought that that was something that was a separate issue, and maybe I'm wrong on that. Is that part of this decision, or will it be a separate vote, a separate issue? And about the appropriate vegetation, how long does Clenera have to get that appropriate vegetation screening in place? Who decides what's appropriate? Because as was pointed out, it takes a long time to grow trees. And then the last question, does the decommissioning bond stay with the solar farm if the ownership changes? If Clenera steps out of the picture, does that bond stay here anyway? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening.
Good evening. Seth Green, 5318 Valley Farm Road. My property is about 1.5 miles or 2 miles from this. I guess I've got just a couple comments. I have problems with the zoning ordinance. The first thing, the Planning Commission voted 6-1 to deny this. I would think you would follow this process and take their recommendations. On the zoning setbacks, I've gone through this process quite a bit. I have some commercial property. I've probably invested maybe $35 million into the state of Iowa. And most cities, now just imagine a city taking 750 acres and zoning at one zoning, doesn't matter what city, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, whatever, without any contingencies on setbacks or whatever. So you're going to take 750 acres and put it in there. I've gone through this process in probably 6 communities. We have requirements, so there's a comprehensive plan. And so let's say you had an industrial park. They would be buffered by commercial business. Then you would buffer it with office buildings. Then you would buffer it with multifamily development. Then you would have the residential houses there. That's done in every city. I am horrified that Linn County set this zoning, that they could go anywhere. I'm building a new house there on Valley Farm Road. If somebody sold out, I would be very, very disappointed. I think that the planning department should disclose to every person that buys or sells a house, builds a new business or whatever, that this zoning is in place. It would have a huge factor on somebody's living. Just the aesthetics part of it, it would have a huge factor. Every commercial developer has to go through this. The property owners have rights, but their rights are under the current zoning. If they want to change that zoning, then they should, I would take it as common sense that you would have to have a buffer zone on this. Every city, every commercial property, you guys know, you've been involved in this, that you would have a buffer. It's industrial, commercial, office buildings, residential housing, so that you can soften this up. And that's all a lot of these residents are asking for. And I think it's time. I've sat back here and listened to it. I've been to the planning, and I think there's so many questions and so many comments about this, that this zone was put in play about 10 years ago, the way I understand it. Maybe it's time, no one's proposed one of these, so for 10 years, nobody's proposed it. Maybe it's time to look at this and just step back and see what the state's going to do, see what other communities are going to do, and just take a breath and then try to get some of these concerns out. I know that some people have sat up here. Most of them I've listened to that are for the project have some financial bearing on this. And money doesn't always talk, because I have a proposal for an $8 million project in Marion, and I can tell you the city of Marion has put red flags, red roadblocks in front of me for months. And it's amazing that people will say they want jobs, but they really don't want jobs. So I know money has a factor, and it does on this situation. It's amazing what's all these comments, and that we're not taking a breath. I would have thought that you would have done the recommendations of the Planning Commission at the first one. But after you heard all the comments after the first meeting, the second meeting, I thought, okay, they're for sure going to just deny this. Let's step back and look at this ordinance. And the sake of, I have a business, I would vote, if I was in your shoes, I would vote this down, because we don't need any jobs in this country. We can't even fulfill the jobs that are out there now. Stores are closed, restaurants are closed. all these jobs are available and no one is filling them. So we need no more jobs. And climate change, the climate has been changing for thousands and thousands of years. This was all shaped by glaciers, so it's one political party's view that the climate is changing faster, and maybe somebody else doesn't believe that. But otherwise, I would recommend taking a breath, stopping on it, and I think that everybody needs to just look at it and say, okay, if you would propose this 700 thing in Cedar Rapids, they would never zone anything 750 acres, all the same zoning. So thank you for taking this time.
Thank you, Seth. Good evening.
Good evening, Board. My name is Fred Hubler. I live at 9422 Deer Ridge Drive, Cedar Rapids. I'd like to speak in opposition to this project because replacing a facility that produced 100% of its rated output power about 90% of the time with something that averages only 20% of its rated output intermittently and has to be backed up by reliable on-demand generation will not provide reliable, cost-effective electricity. Even the 20% that is generated is not generated during peak demand. It's generated at midday, while peak demand is in the morning, in a couple hours in the morning and about 4 or 5 hours in the evening. So it won't even reduce the capacity of the baseload generation required without batteries. I'll say more about that later, but it may be true that Linn County REC and other electric co-ops are nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that the companies they buy power from are. Those companies are very much into making a profit. While wind and solar generators have very generous tax credits and power purchase agreements that require utilities to take everything they generate, baseload generators are required to operate at a fraction of their capacity to accommodate wind and solar, which drives up their costs. In fact, in 2017, Bloomberg News published an article reporting that the Quad Cities Exelon nuclear plant had to pay over $92 a megawatt hour for the privilege of providing electricity to the grid at a time when wholesale electricity rates were around $40 per megawatt hour. The fact that there has never been an industrial scale wind or solar project that reduced electricity rates has led to the concept of levelized costs. That is, comparing the cost of must-accept wind and solar with must-sit idle backup generation to claim that wind and solar are now cheaper than baseload generators. That reminds me of the story about a man on trial for murdering his parents who pleaded with the court for mercy on grounds that he was an orphan. Those proposing this project say the reason for choosing this area is the existence of transmission line capacity. But what will the utilization rate of that capacity be? Where will the new generation and transmission capacity to back up this intermittent sources come from? Advocates of this proposal have also told us there are companies wanting to locate or expand here where there is renewable energy. I believe there would be a lot more companies wanting to locate or expand in areas where there is reliable economic energy. We should look closely at what Europe's obsession with wind and solar is causing right now. Even with the highest electricity rates in the world, with the possible exception of South Australia, they are facing very serious energy supply problems this winter. This could very well be our future if we follow down the same path with China and India, and while China and India build more coal plants. Before anyone talks, well, as far as battery backup goes, that's just going to add more expense and another rate increase if it ever comes, and it will still I mean, it'll be prohibitively expensive to give enough battery backup to cover up a prolonged, bunch of cloudy days or a bunch of what's happening in Europe now. They've had the wind output, output of their wind turbines is about 20% below what it was a year ago, and that's causing all kind of problems for them. And about, the previous speaker spoke about climate change, as other speakers have here, and he's right about we have always had extreme weather. There is a theoretical reason why climate change could lead to less extreme weather, or what climate models and all climate scientists have told us over the past many years.
Mr. Huber, I'm sorry, your time has expired, but we will put your prepared remarks into the public record.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Good evening.
Good evening. Hi there, I'm Erin Moeller, and I reside at 1171 Longview Court, just south of Mount Vernon. And Board of Supervisors, there we go. Supervisors, I'm about coming back too. I challenge you at this time just to stop for a moment and do a little sanity check. You might notice it wasn't by mistake I put on this America Needs Farmers sweatshirt. Supervisor Zumba, I'm pretty sure you realize the value of this land that we're talking about. 750 acres of prime Iowa farmland. With an average of 200 bushel corn, quick math, represents 150 bushel of corn, which can help feed 15,000 head of hogs. Do you have any idea the economic impact 15,000 head of hogs has on this community? I've heard a lot of talk about how this solar farm is going to help produce local jobs. Do you know how many jobs are necessary to help sustain an Iowa farm? Of course, you got the farmer, a couple helping hands, probably his wife if she's lucky. What about the seed corn dealer, the chemical dealer, the local co-op, the grain buyer, the grain hauler, the hog buyer, the meat packer? The list goes on and on. Pete Breck shared with us last week that every ag dollar produced is reinvested 14 times in our local economy. 14 times. And to think one of the motivating factors to support this solar farm is to create jobs. Seriously? Everywhere we look these days, there's help wanted signs. We don't have enough laborers to fill the current needs we have. Many of these quality jobs that our skilled union workers are doing are located at General Mills, Cargill, ADM, Quaker Oats, all here in Linn County. Each of these companies are reliant on products our Iowa farms produce. Now you tell me what's going to happen if we continue to take prime Iowa farmland out of production. It's going to impact these companies. Like my dad always told me, be careful not to bite the hand that feeds you. Swati, supervisors, I realize you are working endlessly to help stimulate economic progress, and I commend you for that. However, I encourage you to consider the natural resources this region has been blessed with. The good Lord gave us rich farmland to produce crops that help feed livestock and produce food that helps to feed the world. America needs farmers. Now, no, don't get me wrong, we also need to explore clean sources of energy as we consider our future. Like Pete also shared last week, I think we can all agree there's not a person in this room that opposes solar. However, as we discussed, solar can be placed virtually anywhere. Why on earth would we target 85 CSR land to place these solar panels? I applaud the Iowa Senate bill that they're working to pass that would protect rural land with a CRS later greater than 65 being taken out of production for the purpose of turning into a solar farm. If we all agree solar is a viable form of energy to consider, why can't we work together to find a more appropriate place to place these solar panels? It saddens me to look around this room and hear the farmers who are in favor of signing their valuable farmland over to this program. We're talking about century farms that are being enticed by the almighty dollar. The good Lord didn't bless this region with fertile farm ground to grow solar farms. No, it's here. It's intended to raise crops and help feed you and me. Maybe they don't have the means, the know-how, or the desire to farm anymore and are seeking financial security. You know, farming is a lot of work and it includes a lot of risk, but there are other options. And I fear what's going to happen if we give up 750 acres here, 2,500 acres there, to these solar initiatives. Clinera, I don't expect you to get this. You're not from Iowa, and you'll never know what it means to be an Iowan. But supervisors, I hope and pray that you do some soul searching. I'm praying for you guys, and I hope that we can strive towards a mutually beneficial resolution. I think there are some, I know you want to make a decision, but we have some really big issues that need to be overcome. You mentioned the non-participants being protected by the, if there's a weather event and debris is strewn in my dad's farm, that he has a farm just adjacent to this. The project owner is responsible for making sure that's cleaned up within 72 hours? Is that what you said? It's a lot of work to do in 72 hours. The decommissioning rates, I'm not convinced that you have that all figured out. You have a big decision to make. I really hope that you consider being Iowa strong and vote in support of protecting our land's most valuable resources.
Thank you, Erin.
I emailed the supervisors actually earlier today.
Okay, we'll forward it on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Great.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Deb Yates, 2362 Young Road.
Can you step up a little?
You need to step up to the mic. Yep.
Deb Yates, 2362 Young Road, Palo. On June 29th, Elena Wolford, Linn County Attorney, stated that it would be in the best interest of the county to change ordinances prior to receiving applications. On June 30th, 2021, a moratorium was requested and denied for time to work with planning and development on some of the issues we were concerned about in the Renewable Energy Overlay Ordinance. We were reassured that conditions could be added. You have heard Carolyn Peterson share her concerns. She outlined her concerns and submitted detailed information about problems like decommissioning. I'm here to add another piece to this puzzle. There is currently in Linn County over 6,300 acres of land under lease for solar development. That is just short of 10 square miles, or 5,775 football fields. It is not just the Coggon project or the land around the old nuclear site. This will be 2% of the farmland in this county, not just the 0.5% supporters keep using in their arguments. From 2012 to 2017, Linn County lost 4% of their farmland to things like urban sprawl. Is 6% loss in the next few years acceptable? What do you think the backbone industries of Cedar Rapids will think of this? We are home to ADM, the largest corn processing plant, Quaker Oats, the largest cereal plant, plus Cargill, Ingredient, and General Mills. There is also an additional 2,000 acres under lease directly adjacent in Benton County, surrounding the town of Atkins. These projects will choke off Palo, Covington, and yes, Cedar Rapids to the west. What you do with this first project will set precedent for the future. Are you going to ask for realistic standards for that the residents deserve? Or are you going to let solar developers decide how the county is used? I do have one comment off my little strip. I am very disappointed in Clinera. They have come up here many times and have said they want to be good neighbors. And yet, I do not believe they have, since you guys have set the 1250, tried to talk to any of them and ask them. I have been working with these people, and I know they are willing to negotiate. So please, push these people to do what they could do. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
They have it. I emailed it this afternoon.
Okay. We will forward that on to you, Becky. Any additional? Tracy, good evening.
My name's Tracy Nelson. I live at 3311 Pleasant Creek Road, Palo, Iowa. And I'm came here to revisit the property value impact again. And I brought the, in their original thing they played on the first Monday, They talked about the report they had from Cohn Resnick, which basically stated that there wouldn't be any effect on the property values. And I hadn't read this one, and so I thought, well, I'll take a look at it. And Cohn Resnick, they were giving advice on a solar company they were planning a 100 megawatt solar facility. And so they, out of all the solar plants in the USA, they picked out 25 to compare with. And out of those 25, they end up using, I think, 13 or 9 different companies with 13 different spaces. And they ranged in megawatt size from, I had it written down here somewhere. Well, anyways, from like 2.4 megawatts, were 60 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts, 129, 170, 150, 14, 114. I think I cut off my thing. But anyway, I went back and I thought it was really weird that they were comparing them to really small, really tiny solar farms. I might have cut that off on the left side. I apologize that that's not on there. But they were really most of them really small. Some, like, there was a 40 and then there's a 80. But anyway, so I went to, it's called the Solar Farms in the United States of America, RESDM, and it gave a list of all the solar farms from 0.8 to 551 megawatts, including the lot size, the map, the address with satellite picture. And so I went through that. It took me all day, but I went through that and I compared all the solar sites that were between 60 and 120 acres, or megawatts, between 60 and 120 megawatts. And I found out of the whole list of all the solar plants in the US, there were 38 solar farms between 60 and 110 megawatts. And there were 38 all total. 33 had no homes within over 1 mile. 4 had 2 to 3 homes, 100 foot to the property line and 250 foot to the house. And then there was 1 that had a small development of about 6 homes. And so in all of the 60 megawatt to 110 megawatts, there was only 5 residences there? Well, plus the 6 or 8 homes. Anyway, it's a very, very small number. And so and if you looked, you can go look at that, go to that scale farm, solar farms in the United States of America, RESDN, and you could look up every single site and you can see how few homes there are when you're in an area of that size of solar. And so by industry standards, they don't put solar sites that big in areas with a lot of residences, hardly in at all. In fact, when you do I did the math on that, the average setback to a house, if you go by using what is actually already here in the United States, the average setback is 5,240 feet, which is just short of a mile. And so I'm just saying that's industry standards. And I don't know if yours is cut off on the left side, but mine is. So you might not have the listing of the sizes, but if you go look on the 3 pages, it has the solar farms here, and it shows how many megawatts. There's 20 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 8.6 megawatts, 28.56 megawatts, 19.72 megawatts, 24.9 megawatts. And so they used very, very small solar farms comparing against a 100 megawatt solar farm. And so, and even on the Resnick report, if you'll look, I took out the one that it was only like 1.2 megawatts because it was a small community solar. And
Tracy, your time has expired.
Okay.
Thank you.
The lot size in theirs is 205, distance from a lot.
Thank you.
Not just the house.
And I think you have this for us. Oh. Thank you. Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Beautifully.
Actually, I'm going to start with, I kind of feel bad for Clenera. Yeah. Because how did we get here?
Could you state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Laura Myers, 3372 64th Street Drive in Palo, Iowa.
Thanks, Laura.
I hear the part about moving the goalposts. If I remember correctly, the energy overlay was December of 2020, in the middle of COVID. Nobody was leaving their homes. My question to you is, who was on whatever committee came up with the goalposts? Because I can pretty much guarantee you that you didn't go out into the rural community and include any of us that are going to be affected. So now it's going to affect us and them. That's why we asked for a moratorium. My asks, test the panel. There's not supposed to be any lead in them. If you look at, you have mine. In their application, they list a risen solar panel. If you look at the product list for the risen solar panel, the first line item on there is solder wire. In the product itself, it's 60/40 lead tin solder. They make lead-free solder. In the meantime, Clenera changed the panel. According to what was up there, it's WAREE, W-A-A-R-E-E, or something like that. And they changed the spec sheet on the application, but not the resin panel. There is a test. It's essentially a DNA test for a panel. It will tell you exactly what's in it. I don't think we should be swapping out one form of pollution or contamination for another. So whatever panel they decide to use, have it tested. Next, we talk about distance. I keep asking, Clenera considers itself a generation facility. They were required to get a generation certificate. That means they're greater than 25 megawatts. Why are they not required to build to generation facility standards? Category 3, not Category 1. I'd like to see the 28-inch panel as requested by your professional. I understand that they agreed to clean up any damage, but having a lot of damage because of the derecho, insurance will tell you if it lands on your property, it's yours to clean up. So I don't know if we have the wherewithal to actually force them to clean up the damage. So I'd like to see some kind of fund for that. When all this is said and done, I hope we can go back and make a better procedure, because I think if we had started with including everybody in this, we wouldn't be here today. Nobody is anti-solar. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, how are you?
Thank you. Steve Myers, 3372 64th Street Drive, Palo, Iowa. And I just wanted to, I wasn't going to talk today, so I didn't make prepared remarks, but I did want to clear up a couple of things. And one thing is property values. I did a lot of research about property values when this first came up, and I found that there were 3 distinctly different methods of evaluation that were used in these types of studies. The first one, the University of Texas did one where they just surveyed some realtors and said, what do you guys think? Well, that's kind of an opinion-based method of evaluation. The second method of evaluation is comparative analysis, similar to what realtors do. In comparative analysis, you take 3 or 4 houses, 5 or 6 houses, and if they're not exactly, absolutely the same, it's now opinionated. It's now subjective, because now you have to balance the 2 places and say, yeah, this one matches, This one doesn't really, but I'll match the 2-stall garage for the brand new roof. And now they're kind of the same, okay? And we all understand that. And that's what the most of the solar property value studies are based on, comparative analysis. The third method, the University of Rhode Island, where they used an objective analytical method, where they looked at housing sales in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island within 1/10 of a mile of solar facilities, within a mile of solar facilities, and then a control group at 3 miles of solar facilities. And in those studies, that study looked at over 300,000 sales. And in 300,000 sales, they came up with, if you're within 1/10 of a mile, you're going to lose 12%. And if you are within a mile, you're going to lose 7%, as compared to houses between the mile and the 3 mile range. Now, it is correct, as Clinera stated earlier, that in that study, they said it was insignificant in rural areas. But if you read 2 sentences past that statement, they said because these are like 1 to 5 megawatt facilities, they couldn't see them. So if you can't see them, and they made that statement very clear, if you can't see it, or if you can see it, you're going to lose property value. If you can't see it, you're not going to lose property value. Additionally, I did contact the author of that study, Professor Corey Lang of the University of Rhode Island. And he gave me some more information. I sent that to you a few months ago. I can send it to you again. He gave me more information about different studies. There was one from the University of North Carolina that found similar results after looking at 70,000 home sales in the vicinity of solar facilities. And that was a doctoral study by a professor-to-be at the University of North Carolina. But basically, we've heard all these things about property values, and there's differences. Some people say it doesn't affect, some people say it affects, but you got to look at the method of evaluation, and the different method of evaluation give you different results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. John, I think Ms. Peterson is going to make a comment, and then you can certainly make one. Thank you.
Good evening again. My name is Carolyn Peterson. I live in Cedar Rapids. My address hasn't changed since Thursday. It has become painfully obvious during the previous meetings that this method of approving renewable energy overlays for utility solar projects in Linn County is entirely inadequate. And although Linn County has a few highly qualified employees, the breadth of knowledge required to properly evaluate these projects is severely lacking. It is apparent that as of tonight, the county has not adequately evaluated this project, and the applicant is poised to take advantage of this situation to the detriment of Linn County taxpayers. Regarding the decommissioning cost estimate, have you read Stanley Consultants' entire report, any of you? Because, I will quote it to you, that 20% that they nicely added, it does not cover everything. If you'll actually read what Stanley Consultants says, the decommissioning costs do not appear to be conservative or market value in nature, and the salvage value is optimistic when compared to other Midwestern state projects. So that 2.7 that you've been all going on, it's also wrong. That 20% did not fix it. There are additional problems. I can't get this across to you. Stanley Consultants said it too. I'm saying it too. 2.7 is not it. And in the interest of time, several people have asked that I present the following recommendations to which we all agree. And I'm going to pause and take a moment for them to stand up for a few seconds so you can see who they are. There are a few also online, and we have lost a few because of the late hour. Okay, so we propose the following additional conditions to better ensure a properly designed, properly funded project with equity for non-participating property owners. To summarize, number 1, 1250-foot soft negotiable setbacks. Number 2, 28-inch panel height and seed mix as proposed by your expert, Mr. Gallagher. Number 3, construction to Category 3 construction standards, since the project will generate more than 25 megawatts. Number 4, revise the decommissioning plan cost estimate. Number 5, test one panel, just one, of each model used for RCRA 8 TCLP. Number 6, update the decommissioning cost estimate annually. Number 7, obtain a performance bond based on the revised decommissioning cost estimate. Number 8, do not raise the perimeter fencing in areas near occupied residences. If you look at my information, there's a very good reason for that, and I would please ask you to read that. Number 10, Linn County will create a mediation committee and provide free legal services to neighboring property owners in the event that they are unable to receive adequate and timely relief for property damage. Number 11, in addition to acknowledging any debris on neighboring properties within 72 hours of a storm, please actually make the project owner go clean it up. Did you notice that's not actually in the requirement? You never required them to do anything, just acknowledge it. The applicant has claimed several times that any additional condition will be a deal breaker or a project killer. If their financial situation is so fragile for this project that they cannot possibly plant some trees for neighbors or keep their panels from blowing away during a storm, we don't want this project in Linn County. Whenever this applicant uses terms deal breaker or project killer, you need to think more risk to Linn County. Remember, your duty is to Linn County residents, not this applicant. If their project cannot properly be designed with proper funding and equity for non-participating property owners, then they should not be allowed to proceed. There are other utility solar projects in the works for Linn County. Perhaps one of those applicants will have a better financed project. It is not your duty to appease companies with poor financial proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Good evening, John.
Good evening, Supervisors. John Zakrasik, 531 Lawndale Drive, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Linn Clean Energy District continues to support this project vigorously and believes it's urgently needed for the community. Mark Frank could not be here tonight because of COVID, and he asked me to read this statement. I don't know if that's acceptable.
Sure.
If it is, I'd like to proceed. He lives at 4205 Vista Road in Ely. Mark says, for months I've been advocating for two fundamentals: protecting the property rights of landowners, both for and against utility scale solar, plus taking the time necessary to work the details carefully for the most successful outcome for all. Previously, I spoke in opposition to 1,250-foot setbacks. However, I'm also a big believer in what works. Since 1,250 became part of the conversation, I've seen all sides become willing to talk and begin to work together for an outcome with benefits for all. I've begun working with Mr. Greg Bickle of Coggon on the details of an approach that can work for all. Greg has stayed in touch with members of the no utility scale solar community, and I've talked with John Zakrasik, here I am, to involve the pro solar community. Greg and I are working to unite the county in support of a solar project with benefits for all. This is my ask for the Board of Supervisors. Allow us the time to work on this joint process before making additional changes and before any final vote on the Coggon solar project. We hope to make a thorough presentation when we have worked through the details with opportunity for questions. We're making good progress. I believe all groups previously both for and against the solar project agree on respecting the property rights of all. We want a united community where all benefit. We want friends and neighbors to stay friends and neighbors. Please do not rush finalization. This is too important to hurry. We now know we have until Monday to negotiate, and we know that Clenera has to be at the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you for reading Mark's statement. Mr. Mollenauer, how are you?
Hello, hello Supervisors. Brian Mullenbach, 4004 Highwoods Road, Centerpoint. Supervisors, your regular responsibility to allocate funds and grant approvals is understandable based on the elected position. My question, how productive is partially funding a community outreach program or mental health program which only gets it started and off the ground, but not fully functional? The decommissioning plan at $1 million is not even partially funded based on the level of risk the county is considering taking on. Please revisit this part of the Linn County Solar Ordinance. As alluded to a few times tonight, when the Linn County Solar Ordinance was created by the Linn County staff at the time, it was in good faith and knowledge based on the information at that time. Transitioning a little bit, so do medical surgeons when they advise patients their procedure options. Would you choose to have a 50-year-old medical procedure done with a scalpel, staples, and stitches, or the most current medical procedure using less invasive robotic techniques? Science, technology, and the energy industries are moving as fast as electrons. Did you like that? Did you catch that? Electrons? Gotcha. Which means a roughly 10-year-old code is outdated. Take the time to allow the current Linn County staff to review the current data and update the Linn County Code of Ordinances so Linn County can proceed with the less invasive procedure instead of having to use a scalpel, staples, and stitches. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Steve Mason, 6547 Benton Road. I would encourage anyone eligible to run for the Linn County Supervisors in District 1 and District 2 to do so. We need supervisors who will look out for the welfare of their constituents, protect the taxpayers, believe in transparency, and not have any hidden agendas, and most of all, common sense. Linn County has already experienced a renewable energy project. In 1986, a $4.5 million hydroelectric plant in Cedar Rapids. Nothing stays the same forever. A Cedar Rapids Gazette article reported this is the plant which began operation in 1986, that long had underperformed, prompted calls by a City Hall Efficiency and Reform Committee in 1994 to sell it, had city employees at the time term it a white elephant, and had been disabled and out of commission for 17 months before the June flood. What was the demolition cost to the taxpayers? The solar overlay rezoning process all started in December of 2013 with little transparency. Commissioner Zubach presented a motion for an 18-month moratorium. Linn County Planning and Development Director Charlie Nichols said the current ordinance allows the county to be flexible and approach any application with feedback for changes. County supervisors, he said, can vote to apply conditions for approval at any time during the application process. This was posted December 14th for the Coggon solar application. It stated the 3 meeting dates in January. It also said additional standards may be imposed as part of the review process. Fast forward to Monday, January 10th. 2 proposals were presented. One in particular, 1250 setback, was met with comments from a supervisor that Canara had already plans for construction with a 300-foot setback. The rule states, apply conditions for approval at any time during the application process. Keep in mind, November 30th, the Linn County Planning and Zoning Committee recommended on a vote 6 against and 1 for denial. There is a project in the works for another industrial solar site. Right now it's phase 1, and then 2, and then later 3. There's another phase, phase 4. This phase would encompass an additional 23,000 acres in Linn County. Keep in mind, with production, you cannot use eminent domain. To transfer power to a substation, it needs transmission lines. Transmission lines can use eminent domain. Lord only knows how many people's backyards will be impacted. The Coggon project opens the barn doors that will never be able to be closed. I have to say it looks like Canara has been successful in their tactics to obtain their goal. You have been successful in dividing families, neighbors, friends, and communities. Is that something to be proud of? It's interesting to note to see how politicians will make decisions, borrow and spend money for special projects, leave office and move away, leaving the locals with the long-term consequences. We have an example right now of a decision to be made, and Supervisor Stacy Walker has already announced his decision to leave his position in the future. I believe there are 2 reasons Canara is only renting and not buying the farm ground. After all, farm ground is a good investment. First, lower and selective upfront costs. Second, when the market conditions change, they can file bankruptcy and walk away. Hazardous material rule. He who touches it last owns it. In the end, when something goes wrong with this project and future projects, I want the taxpayers and the voters of Linn County to know who is responsible for the approval of this project and others to come. I have more statements to make, but I only have 5 minutes to talk about this project that will affect my future and the next generations. And then I have to shut up and sit down. Therefore, this entire letter will be going on the internet. Understanding begins with communication, and trust begins with transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Thanks. Hello.
My name is Darrow Center. I live in Cedar Rapids. Supervisors, I admire you doing your best to inform yourselves, inform all the people engaged, and to weigh all the costs and benefits, not only for the people living nearby this project, but for everyone you represent in Linn County that this project affects. Thank you for this dedicated time for this process, the transparency of the process, for listening to us, your cautious and careful considerations, addressing so many of the concerns, and overall making this project have so many benefits to the community. With a little more negotiation, I think that the project's benefits will easily outweigh the costs in both quantity and quality for the majority of people in Linn County. Thanks.
Thank you, Darrow. Appreciate it. Looking around the room. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Seeing no other public comment, we'll be adjourned.